I remember the drive there like it was yesterday, though I know it wasn't. The road stretched out like a ribbon, cracked and uneven, flanked on either side by tall, unkempt grass that bent and swayed in the wind like it was alive. The sky was bruised with color, a heavy mix of purple and orange that made the approaching night feel almost suffocating. I had been called to cover the night shift at the old patrol station on the edge of town, a place no one went anymore, not willingly. As I approached, I felt the usual twinge of unease, the kind that makes your stomach tighten for no apparent reason. There were no lights, no signs of life. Even the trees along the road seemed to lean away from the building, as if recoiling. My headlights cut through the dimness, revealing the station in fragments, peeling paint, boarded-up windows, and a roof that sagged like it had given up on the world. It looked abandoned, yet somehow it felt as if it were waiting for me. I parked my car in the cracked lot, the gravel crunching under my tires in a way that seemed louder than it should have. I sat for a moment, just breathing, trying to push down the sense of wrongness that had crept in from the second I turned off the main road. The air smelled of damp earth and rust. There was no wind, but the leaves in the distance shivered anyway. Something about it made my skin prickle. I grabbed my flashlight and keys, stepping out into the evening chill. My boots crunched on gravel and broken bits of concrete. The station stood in silence, except for the occasional creak of the roof above, settling, or so I told myself. The door was heavy and stiff, groaning when I pushed it open. Inside it smelled like dust, mold, and old metal. My footsteps echoed in the empty hall. Every sound seemed exaggerated. The slightest creak or whistle of air bouncing off the walls like it was alive. The reception area was dark, the faint orange of the sunset spilling through grimy windows. The desk was coated in dust, papers scattered as though someone had left in a hurry decades ago. I ran my fingers across the surface. Part of me expected to see fingerprints. Part of me hoped I wouldn't. The silence pressed against me. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, almost suffocating, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I turned to the hall leading deeper into the station. My flashlight barely reached past the doorway. The shadows were long and black, curling along the walls like smoke. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself this was just an old building. Old buildings groan, settle, make noises. That's it. Just noises. I began to make a slow tour, checking each room like I was supposed to, though I didn't really know what I was looking for. The patrol office was empty. Desks, chairs, filing cabinets, abandoned. Papers with faded ink lay scattered. Some pages had dates from 30 years ago. Other notes were scribbled quickly, indecipherable now. I picked up a sheet and tried to read it in the fading light. My eyes kept catching the corners of the room, where shadows gathered and clung. Every time I looked away, I felt a flicker, like the darkness had shifted. In the back, I found the stairwell. It led down to the basement, the kind of basement you don't imagine having lights or warmth. I didn't go down, not yet. I leaned against the wall, feeling the cool plaster under my hand. The floor creaked under my boots, but it was the silence between the creaks that made me tense. There was a rhythm to it, almost like the building itself was breathing in short, deliberate bursts. I wandered toward the back exit, thinking maybe a look outside would calm me. The yard was overgrown, weeds taller than my waist, pushing through the cracks in the asphalt. I could see the outline of the old watchtower far at the edge of the property. It was a skeletal thing, metal frame rusted and thin. It leaned slightly to one side, like it had fought storms for decades and finally started to give in. I shined my flashlight toward it, but the beam barely cut through the gloom. There was nothing there, or at least I told myself there was nothing there. I paused and listened. The wind had picked up slightly, rustling the weeds. Somewhere a branch snapped. I froze. My mind jumped, imagining footsteps, someone or something approaching me. I checked the perimeter, but the lot was empty. I tried to laugh it off, muttering to myself about nerves and being alone for the first night. My voice sounded alien in the open air, harsh against the creeping darkness. I returned inside, trying to settle in. The office had a small break area with a single grimy window. I sat at one of the cracked chairs, letting the flashlight rest on the desk, its beam casting jagged shadows across the walls. I pulled out my notebook and pen, writing down the routine for the night. Maybe keeping busy would help. The more I wrote, the more I felt the quiet pressing in. It wasn't just empty. It was aware. The building seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking directly at it. Shadows pooled in corners, and the faint smell of something metallic lingered in the air. I kept telling myself I was imagining things. Of course I was. I've been through enough patrol stations to know when an old building is simply old and when something else is going on. And yet the feeling persisted. Every so often I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. A shadow darting down a hallway, something just out of reach of my flashlight. I turned, but there was nothing. Nothing ever stayed. I thought about calling it in, about telling dispatch that the building was far too creepy to spend the night in. But the station had been decommissioned, and technically, I was just supposed to be checking in for the night. Still, a small voice inside me whispered, "Don't stay too long. Don't stay alone." The sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving only the fading glow on the horizon. The building grew darker, swallowing the corners of the office. The shadows weren't just shadows anymore. They were thick and heavy, clinging to the edges of the room. I felt a chill run down my spine, cold air brushing against my neck, though every window and door was closed. My flashlight flickered. I shook it. A momentary relief until the beam caught something I wasn't expecting. A dark shape at the end of the hallway where the stairwell led down to the basement. I froze. My heart thumped in my chest, painfully loud. The shape didn't move at first. Just waited. I told myself it was a trick of the light, that the shadows were playing games. I leaned forward, squinting, and the shape seemed to grow taller, darker, more defined. And then it vanished. I exhaled sharply, trying to calm myself. I could feel the tension coiling in my stomach, in my shoulders. I knew the building was empty. I knew there was no one there. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, something patient, something that had been waiting for me to arrive. I sat back, gripping the edge of the desk. The night was only beginning, and I already felt the weight of hours stretching ahead. The quiet wasn't a relief. It was a warning. I could feel it, creeping along the walls, pooling in the corners, settling over me like a thick fog. And I knew, even as I told myself otherwise, that this night would be different, that the station was alive in ways I wasn't meant to understand. I didn't know it yet, but the first steps I took inside had already marked me. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of wind through broken windows, every shadow that moved just out of reach. They were all waiting. Waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to stay too long, waiting for me to see the building not just as an empty station, but as a place that remembered. And by the time the sun was gone, leaving the sky a deep, oppressive black, I realized that I was alone. Truly alone. I thought the hardest part was walking into the station at dusk, stepping past the old doors and peeling paint, and feeling the air press against me like it knew something I didn't. But that wasn't it. The hardest part was walking down the hall. The hall stretched out longer than it should have, or maybe it just felt longer because of the quiet. My footsteps echoed, each one a sharp knock against the worn linoleum. I tried to keep my breathing steady, pretending the echoes were just that, echoes. But every time I passed a doorway or a darkened corner, the air seemed to shift, and I could have sworn I heard whispers. It started small, a faint hiss, like someone exhaling through a keyhole. At first I told myself it was the building settling. The old walls groan, they said. I repeated it to myself over and over. The words felt hollow, because the whisper came again, just after I told myself it was nothing. This time it sounded like a syllable, a fragment, maybe a name. My name! I froze, holding my flashlight in both hands. The beam wavered slightly as my grip tightened. I listened. The whisper didn't come again immediately. Only silence, thick and suffocating. But the longer I stayed still, the more aware I became of the building itself. The hall wasn't just empty. It was listening. I forced myself to move again, one foot in front of the other. Step, step, step. Each step bouncing against the walls, filling the hall with sound. I could feel eyes on me, though I knew I was alone. I could feel the weight of the building, pressing from the edges of the walls, leaning closer, just beyond my vision. I reached a doorway on my left, The room had once been an office, maybe a break room. I hadn't noticed it before, or maybe I had, and the shadows had hidden it. I stepped closer, shining my flashlight across the desks. The dust was thick here, and the papers scattered as if someone had been searching for something. My fingers brushed against a chair. It rocked slightly, though I hadn't touched it enough to move it. The whisper came again. This time I heard more than a syllable. It was a string of words, almost coherent. "Stay. Don't leave." My stomach tightened. I swallowed, trying to steady my racing thoughts. Surely it was just the wind moving through the broken windows. Surely. I turned back to the hall. That's when I noticed it. The shadows were moving differently than before. Not just the corners, not just the edges of the walls. The shadows seemed to stretch, stretching toward me with every heartbeat. I could see them shift in ways that didn't make sense. A hallway I had walked past before now looked longer, darker, unfamiliar. My flashlight flickered. I shook it, muttering under my breath. The beam steadied, but the shadows, they didn't. They wriggled along the walls like smoke caught in a draft. I could feel them brushing against me, cold and insistent, though nothing actually touched my skin. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I kept moving, forcing myself down the hall. The whispers didn't stop. Sometimes faint, almost lost in the building's weight. Other times louder, closer, as if something was walking just behind me. I dared not look. I told myself looking would only confirm what I already knew. And yet I couldn't resist. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing, just the hall, stretching on endlessly. I turned back and the whisper came again. Clearer this time. "Why are you here?" My stomach dropped. The voice sounded familiar, though I couldn't place it. Not like anyone I knew, but like something I had heard in a dream, or worse, a memory I couldn't remember having. The sound slid along the walls, curling around my ears. I tried to keep walking, but my legs felt heavy like they were moving through water. The hall seemed to elongate, expanding, swallowing light, swallowing sound. My flashlight caught glimpses of corners that weren't there before, doorways that hadn't existed, or maybe I had just missed them. I kept moving, repeating the mantra in my head. "It's just an old building, it's just an old building, it's just an old building." Then I heard it. Footsteps, not mine. A slow, deliberate echo behind me, perfectly synchronized with my own steps. Step, step, step. My breath hitched. I quickened my pace. Step, step, step. The echo quickened too. I stopped. So did it. I moved again. So did it. My heart felt like it was hammering against my ribs. I dared another glance over my shoulder. The hallway behind me was empty. My breath was loud, ragged, filling the silence. I shook my head, trying to shake off the panic that had begun to crawl up my spine. This was the station, empty, abandoned, nothing there. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I reached a small alcove with a row of lockers. I leaned against one, trying to steady myself. The whispers had stopped, but the echo of the footsteps remained in my mind, like a phantom rhythm that wouldn't leave. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to calm my thoughts, trying to ground myself. I kept telling myself it was exhaustion. The night was still young, and my senses were on edge. I opened a locker absent-mindedly. Dust puffed into the air. Inside it was empty, except for a small yellowed piece of paper. I unfolded it carefully. Faded handwriting, almost illegible. My eyes traced the words, and a chill ran down my spine. "We're always here, watching, waiting." I dropped the paper. It floated to the floor with a whispering hiss, like it had exhaled when it landed. I could feel my pulse in my temples. I should have walked out. I should have left, called dispatch, driven home. But I couldn't. Some part of me, stubborn, maybe foolish, wanted to see what was next. I continued down the hall. Every room was the same. Empty, abandoned, yet haunted by some presence I couldn't name. Chairs, desks, filing cabinets, scattered papers, dust thick enough to write your name in. But every so often, something moved out of the corner of my eye. A shadow, a flash, a flicker of motion that vanished when I looked directly at it. The whispers returned as I neared the end of the hall. Louder now, overlapping, a chorus of voices that didn't belong. "Turn back. You shouldn't be here. Stay." My hands shook and I gripped my flashlight tighter. The beam bounced across the walls, catching shapes that seemed to retreat into the darkness. I tried to reason with myself. I had patrolled plenty of old stations. Old stations made noise. Old stations made you feel things. It was all normal, rational, and yet every instinct in me screamed that the hall was alive, that it had been waiting for me. A sudden sound made me jump, a low creak like a door slowly opening somewhere behind me. My flashlight flickered again. I turned sharply, swinging the beam across the hall. Empty. And yet the creak echoed, lingering longer than it should have, like the building itself was breathing, mocking me. I could feel the tension coiling tighter, a heavy weight in my chest. The whispers became almost hypnotic, a soft, continuous hum just beyond the edge of hearing. I felt trapped, as if the walls had shifted, closing in. The hall that had seemed long before now felt endless, stretching away into darkness that my flashlight couldn't pierce. I realized then that I didn't just feel watched. I felt followed. Every step I took was mirrored by something unseen, something patient and persistent. The thought made me shiver violently, though no cold wind blew through the station. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but my body refused. My legs moved, slow and deliberate, as if guided by some external force. I reached the end of the hall, or at least what I thought was the end. There was a stairwell leading upward, but it wasn't where I had remembered it being. My mind reeled. The station was changing around me. I could feel it. Every step, every corner, every shadow shifted as I moved. I realized then that this place didn't just hold memories. It held attention, and now it had me. The whispers became clearer, as if several voices were speaking at once. "We've been waiting. Don't leave. Stay with us." I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. My chest burned with panic. I wanted to run, to leave, but the hall stretched on, endless, every corner a trap, every shadow a watcher. I stopped. The whispers stopped too, leaving only the echo of my own breathing. I could feel eyes on me from every direction, and I realized, with a sinking dread, that the station wasn't empty. It never had been. The hall had grown colder, though I couldn't tell if it was the night settling in or something else. I could feel the chill in my bones, creeping slowly, persistent. My flashlight flickered again as I moved further into the station, the beam cutting through shadows that seemed to twist in ways that defied reason. And that's when I saw it. A door I hadn't noticed before. Rusted metal, paint peeling in jagged strips, with a small barred window at eye level. A cell? A jail cell? I stopped in my tracks. It hadn't been on any of the maps I'd studied, hadn't been mentioned in any reports. And yet there it was, standing like it had always belonged to the station, as if it had been waiting for someone, me. I approached it slowly, every step deliberate. My boots crunched softly against the cracked linoleum, the sound impossibly loud in the silence. The door was old, older than the station itself, the metal warped and sharp along the edges. I rested my hand on it, feeling the cold bite of rust through my gloves. A shiver ran up my spine, then I heard it. A scratch, just a faint scrape, like fingernails against the metal from the inside. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. Another scratch followed, deliberate, slow, deliberate. Someone or something was inside. My mind raced, flipping through every rational explanation I could muster. Could it be an animal trapped? A raccoon or a rat? But the scratches? They had intention. There was intelligence in them. I circled the cell, shining my flashlight across the bars. The beam caught glimpses of nothing, just darkness. But the scratches came again, louder now, echoing through the hall. I pressed my ear to the cold metal. The smell hit me first. Not just rust, something older. Metallic, yes, but mixed with decay, a tang that made my stomach twist. "Hello?" I tried to keep my voice steady, though it came out higher than I expected. Silence. Then another scratch, sharp and quick. I stepped back, heart hammering. It didn't make sense. The station had been abandoned for decades. No one was supposed to be here. No one. And yet, something was inside that cell, waiting, scratching, breathing in rhythm with the building itself. I paced in front of the door, flashlight shaking in my grip. Memories of other stations I'd patrolled surfaced. Empty halls, creaking floors, flickering lights. I had never felt like this. Never felt watched in such a tangible way. The cold pressed against me, and the shadows from the bars stretched long across the hallway, like fingers reaching out to pull me in. Another scratch. This one louder, angrier. I swallowed, trying to force down the panic that was climbing my throat. I couldn't just walk away, could I? Something told me I needed to know what was in there. Needed to see. Curiosity, fear, and some twisted sense of duty all combined into a tight knot in my chest. I bent closer to the bars, shining the flashlight directly inside. The darkness was thick, almost viscous. I couldn't see a floor, walls, or anything at all. And then I saw it. A shadow, shifting near the back, something darker than the darkness itself. I jerked back, heart leaping. But when I looked again, it had vanished. The scratches came again, but now they were accompanied by a low, almost imperceptible sound. A whisper, muffled, crawling through the metal. "Come closer." My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to run. I wanted to get out of the station entirely, but I couldn't move. My legs felt heavy, anchored by something unseen. I looked down and noticed the floor in front of the cell. Scattered bits of rust, flakes that had fallen from the door over the years. They were disturbed, arranged in a pattern that hadn't been there when I first approached. My stomach dropped. The sense of being watched intensified, pressing into me from all sides. The station was no longer just a building. It was aware. I thought about calling dispatch. I thought about saying I had found a cell, maybe left over from decades ago, and that I didn't know what was inside. But even as the thought crossed my mind, I knew I wouldn't. Something about this place didn't want help, didn't want witnesses. And somehow, deep down, I was afraid that if anyone else came, the thing inside the cell would notice. Another scratch. This one was slow, deliberate, almost like someone was dragging their nails along the metal to test me, to measure me. I felt my heartbeat in my throat, in my temples, in the tips of my fingers that gripped the flashlight. I realized then that I had been holding my breath. The sound of it, the scratch, the quiet, the weight of the building was suffocating. I circled the cell again, keeping my distance this time. I had to calm myself. Old building, old metal, probably a rat, I told myself. Just a rat, just an animal, rational, logical. And yet, even saying it didn't help, because deep down, I knew it wasn't a rat. The scratches were intelligent, malicious, waiting for me to look, waiting for me to stay. I forced myself to stand in front of it again, flashlight steadying. The beam cut across the bars, finally revealing the floor. Nothing, just a dusty concrete floor, chipped and worn. But the feeling didn't leave. The building hummed around me, a low, constant vibration that I could feel in my chest. The scratches had stopped, but I could feel them in my mind, scratching at the edges of my thoughts. I leaned closer again, whispering, almost against my will. "Who's there?" No answer. Only silence, thick and cold, curling around me. I took a deep breath and tried to focus on anything else. The walls, the peeling paint, the old desks down the hall, anything rational? But the more I looked, the more the shadows seemed to move toward the cell. Toward me, another sound. Not a scratch this time, a soft scrape, like something dragging across the floor inside. I froze. My flashlight trembled. I could feel a presence, something patient, something that had been waiting for me. I wanted to step back, to leave, but my feet were heavy, unresponsive. My mind was trapped in that hall, circling the cell, listening, imagining, knowing, and then I heard it. A breath. Not human, I realized. Deep, rasping, wet. It came from inside the cell. The air seemed to thicken, as if whatever was inside had claimed it. My pulse surged. I wanted to leave, but some part of me, stubborn, foolish, held me there, rooted to the spot. I moved my hand closer to the bars. I could feel the cold, the rust, and the faint vibration that ran through the metal, almost like a heartbeat. I wanted to knock, to announce myself, to make contact, but my voice caught in my throat. I could hear whispers in my mind now, not just from the station, but from somewhere deeper, older. "You shouldn't be here!" "Stay, we've been waiting." I backed away slowly. My legs trembled. The cell was silent again, but I knew it hadn't gone. I could feel it. Waiting. Patient. Hungry. I wanted to turn and leave. Wanted to call it a night, but the hallway stretched endlessly. shadows pooling at every corner, guiding me deeper into the station. I left the cell, for now, but I didn't look back. Every instinct screamed at me that it was a mistake, that something in that small, rusted cage was alive in a way I couldn't understand. The scratches, the whispers, the breath, it had been waiting. And I had seen it. I would never forget it. The deeper I went into the station, the more it felt like the building was breathing. Not in a metaphorical sense, like old buildings creak and settle, but in a way that was intentional, deliberate. The walls seemed to pulse with memory, vibrating softly beneath my fingertips when I brushed against them. I couldn't tell whether it was my imagination or the station itself, reminding me that I wasn't welcome. The whispers from earlier had faded, replaced by silence thick enough to press against my ears. My flashlight cut swaths of light through the darkness, but the shadows were different now. They weren't static. They moved with intention. They flickered at the edge of my vision and vanished when I looked directly at them. I tried to tell myself it was fatigue, that my mind was playing tricks after hours alone in an empty, decaying station. But I knew the truth. Something had been waiting, and now it was showing itself. I reached the main office again, the one with the broken window that let the last streaks of sunset fall across the dusty floor. As I stepped inside, the air seemed heavier, thicker. The smell of old paper, rust, and something else, something metallic and bitter, clung to me. My flashlight illuminated the desks, the scattered papers, the overturned chairs. And then I saw them. Figures. People. Or maybe they were only echoes of people. Pale, translucent shapes hovering near the desks, moving slowly, deliberately. My heart thudded in my chest, my breath catching in my throat. I wanted to look away, to tell myself it was a trick of the light, a projection of my own exhaustion. But I couldn't. My eyes were drawn to them like magnets. The shapes were officers, I realized, dressed in the faded uniforms of patrols long gone. Their faces were obscured, features melting in and out of clarity. They moved silently, reenacting tasks I had only read about in old logs and reports. One adjusted a chair, another scribbled notes into a ledger, and then one of them looked up, directly at me. I could feel the weight of its gaze, empty eyes burning into my skull. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight. The beam wavered, and the figures shivered and shifted. It was as if they were aware of me, aware that I was intruding into their world. I wanted to speak, to ask what they wanted, but my voice caught. Only a dry rasp escaped, swallowed immediately by the thick silence. I turned and ran, not blindly but carefully, trying to keep my footing on the cracked floor. The hallway stretched longer than I remembered, twisting and bending in impossible ways. Shadows pooled at every corner, and the faint echoes of long-forgotten footsteps followed me. Every creak of the floorboard sounded louder than my own heartbeat. I could feel the station watching, shaping itself around me. And then the whispers returned. Not just the soft exhalations from before, but full voices, overlapping, urgent, almost pleading. "Don't leave. Stay. It's too late." I recognized some of the voices from dispatch recordings, old patrol reports, even my own memories of conversations that had long since faded. They weren't just ghosts of the station. They were ghosts of the work, the people who had vanished over the years, lingering in the air, trapped in these walls. I rounded a corner, and the shadows thickened. One figure stepped into the light of my flashlight. A tall officer, face pale and gaunt, eyes hollow. He raised a hand slowly, and I froze. Not fear exactly, more like the recognition of something I didn't want to know. He spoke, though no sound came from his lips. The words reverberated inside my head. "You shouldn't be here." I ran again, faster this time, my chest burning, legs trembling. The hallways twisted unnaturally, doors appearing where there had been none. I passed rooms I had already seen, rooms that now contained furniture I didn't remember. And everywhere those figures lingered, gliding silently in and out of shadows. My mind screamed at me to make sense of it, but the building didn't obey logic. It obeyed something older, something patient. I came to the stairwell leading down to the basement. The air here was colder, heavier. I could see my breath in front of my face, little clouds puffing out with every terrified exhale. The whispers had grown into a chorus now, overlapping voices, urgent and insistent. "Stay. Join us. Never leave. My fingers gripped the railing, knuckles white, and I realized I didn't want to go down there. And yet something compelled me. Some part of me, against all reason, felt drawn to the darkness below. I stopped at the top of the stairs. A figure emerged from the shadows at the bottom. A man, or what had once been a man, dressed in a uniform that seemed to shift and flicker. His face was blank, but I could feel the despair radiating from him. The whispers merged with the sound of the wind through broken windows, creating a low hum that pressed against my skull. I realized then that the building didn't want to trap me physically. It wanted my mind, my attention. It wanted me to see what it held, to witness the repetition of years, the endless night that had claimed so many before me. Every officer, every patrol, every shift that had ended in disappearance or madness was here. All of them, trapped in their own echoes, performing tasks over and over, unaware of the passage of time. I forced myself to step back from the stairwell. My legs shook violently. I could feel sweat beating at my temples, though the air was cold. I wanted to run, to escape the station entirely, but the hall had stretched again, blocking my path. Shadows pooled at the edges of my vision, thick and tangible, like liquid waiting to swallow me. I could hear whispers from the walls themselves, voices older than anyone I had known. "It's your turn." I stumbled into another room. It looked familiar, yet wrong. A desk sat in the center, papers strewn about, but now the papers were legible. They were reports of missing officers, patrols gone, logs filled with warnings that had been ignored. I recognized some of the names, officers I had trained with, men I had known, now just echoes trapped in this building, and then I saw it, a figure seated at the desk. One of the spectral officers writing, but the pen moved of its own accord, writing words I couldn't read without feeling my stomach twist. The ink was black, thick, and smelled of decay. I wanted to look away, to close my eyes, but I couldn't. I was rooted in place, watching, knowing that if I left, I would carry this vision with me forever. Suddenly, the figure looked up. This time, I swear it was aware of me as a living thing. The eyes, hollow and endless, met mine. And in that moment, I saw every patrol I had ever known, every officer who had vanished, every shift that had ended in disappearance. They were all here in the shadows watching me, waiting for me to understand what it meant to be trapped, what it meant to be remembered forever in a place that had no concern for sanity or time. I turned to run. The hallways had shifted again, stretching, twisting, disorienting. I could feel the shadows closing in, pressing against me, brushing along my arms and neck like smoke. The whispers became louder, frantic, a chorus of despair. "Don't leave! Stay! Join us!" My chest heaved. My mind raced. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. And then, finally, I saw the exit. The front doors just as I had left them. Sunlight, or what I thought was sunlight, seeped through the cracks of the boarded windows. I ran, desperate, heart-hammering, legs barely holding me upright. The shadows lingered at the edges of my vision, stretching, following, but they did not leave the hall. The figures didn't chase me. They were patient. They only waited. I burst through the doors into the cool night air. My lungs burned. My hands trembled. I looked back at the station, and it seemed empty, silent, inert. For a moment, I thought I had imagined everything. Then I saw movement in one of the upper windows, a fleeting shadow, just for an instant, staring at me. And I knew the station hadn't let me go. It had only released me. The drive home was silent, except for the hum of the engine and the ringing in my ears. I kept thinking of the figures, of the whispers, of the way the walls had seemed to breathe. I didn't sleep that night. I kept imagining the shadows moving, creeping along the walls of my own apartment, following me. I knew deep down that the forgotten watchtower hadn't ended its story. And neither had I. I didn't expect anything when I got to the station that night. It was a small building, barely a patrol post, tucked behind a line of pines that blocked out the moonlight. The road leading to it was rough, scattered with stones and fallen branches. Even before I parked, I felt it, an emptiness that went deeper than silence. Not just the absence of people, but the absence of life. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. The station looked abandoned, but oddly intact. Windows were whole, doors still latched. The paint had faded, but it didn't peel like the other stations I'd seen. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and dust with a faint tang of electricity, like metal had been left on too long. My flashlight cut across the hall, showing me desks and filing cabinets, stacked papers, and a phone that hadn't rung in decades. Then I saw the radios. Dozens of them, old models lined up along a shelf, knobs turned to various frequencies. I bent closer, dust puffing into the air, and was shocked to find that one of them was on. Static hissed through the speaker, sharp and grating, the kind of white noise that makes your ears ring. I reached to adjust the dial, curiosity overtaking caution, and that's when I heard it. A voice. It wasn't human, exactly. Not someone speaking normally. The words were broken, twisted, like a recording played backward or through too many layers of interference. "Do not stay," the voice rasped. I jerked back, my hand fumbling against the radio. My heart pounded. It sounded like the static itself was forming language, sending me a warning through the speaker. I tried to convince myself it was a prank or some old tape left running, but the more I listened, the more the voice became coherent. Names, places, times, details I couldn't have known. The basement? They wait, leave now. My stomach knotted. I didn't even know this station well, had never worked here before. How could it know? The static flickered, louder now, almost painful. I put a hand to the speaker, hoping to block the sound, but the voice cut through. "Turn back, before..." The words trailed off, swallowed by white noise. I couldn't stay still. My training told me to investigate, to check the source, but something in my gut screamed to leave. The hairs on my arms stood straight, prickling under the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. I walked slowly through the room, radios lining the walls, some still crackling faintly with interference. Each time I passed one, the static seemed to respond, rising in volume, shifting frequencies. I could feel it scanning me, probing. I wanted to smash them, destroy the noise, but I didn't. I didn't want to anger whatever was sending the message. A memory surfaced, sudden and sharp. Years ago, at another abandoned station, I had heard something like this. A static-filled warning I didn't understand at the time. I had dismissed it as interference, imagination, but the fear I felt then, the same one curling through my chest now, told me it wasn't imagination. The stations remembered. They recorded. They spoke. I moved toward the far corner, where a single larger radio hummed faintly. The knob was set to a low frequency. I twisted it slightly, leaning in. The static resolved for a moment into words. Clearer this time. "They watch from below. Do not descend." My hand froze on the dial. My throat tightened. I knew immediately what they meant. The basement. Every station had one. The older officers' reports spoke of them as nothing more than storage or old maintenance rooms. But the warnings, the disappearances, they all led down there. I swallowed hard. My mouth was dry. Rational thought struggled to regain control. It's an old building, old wiring, old radios. Maybe the sound is carrying from somewhere else. Maybe it's a trick of acoustics. Maybe. But the voice wasn't convincing me with reason. It was convincing me with fear, with knowledge I didn't have. And the more I tried to rationalize, the more the static seemed to insist. It came again, louder, a surge of noise that rattled my teeth. The words were jumbled, overlapping, impossible to separate at first. But I caught fragments. They, beneath, waiting. Descend, danger. My pulse accelerated. I couldn't understand it fully, but my body knew. My body reacted before my brain could. I felt like I was being watched from all angles, not just by the shadows of the room, but by the building itself. I stepped back from the radios, every instinct screaming to run. And yet something drew me closer. A part of me, stubborn or foolish, compelled me to understand, to hear everything. I knelt in front of the largest speaker. The static responded immediately, pulsing like a heartbeat. And then I heard it, an unmistakable sound beneath the hiss. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from below. The basement. My heart thumped painfully. I wanted to call it in, radio dispatch, anyone, but my hand froze over the speaker. The voice, static and words intertwined, cut through the thought. Do not alert them. Do not bring them up. I didn't understand, and yet I understood perfectly. Something or someone was down there, waiting, patient, watching, and the warning was not for me to investigate. It was for me to leave. I forced myself to breathe. In, out. In, out. The static pulsed again, almost mimicking the rhythm. I remembered every patrol I'd done, every station that had ended in confusion, loss, or terror. There was always this pattern: an old building, empty rooms, a basement, and then voices, signals, static, a warning. And somewhere in those warnings, the officers had vanished. Or worse, they had stayed. I shook my head. No, I couldn't be thinking this way. Not yet. I had work to do. Procedure, reports, logs. I ran a hand over my face, trying to push away the dread. But the building didn't let me forget. The radios hummed, crackled, and whispered. Names I didn't know. Details I couldn't possibly know. And beneath it all, that steady rhythm, like footsteps moving just below the floorboards. I stepped back from the radios, my flashlight shaking slightly. The beam caught the edge of a trapdoor in the corner, one I hadn't noticed before. It led down. Of course it did. Every station had one. And I knew what the static was warning me about. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Stay away. Turn back. Leave. And yet, my curiosity, my stubbornness, pressed me forward. I remembered another warning from an old officer, long retired now. If the radios speak to you, don't go down. Don't listen too closely. The basement isn't empty. It isn't storage. It's patient. I laughed softly, humorless, trying to shake off the chill crawling up my spine. I had thought he was exaggerating, and yet here I was, listening, the static alive with urgency, my own pulse synced with the building's rhythm. I crouched beside the trap door, hand hovering over the handle. Static surged again, louder, almost shouting, though no voice existed in the way a human voice does. Go back, go back, go back. My teeth chattered. My legs shook. Every instinct told me to flee. But I couldn't move yet. I had to understand, had to hear one last warning, one last fragment before I decided. The footsteps grew louder, echoing below me. Not running, not panicked. They moved with calm deliberation. The static hissed in response, and the voice became clearer, almost pleading. They are patient. Waiting. Do not awaken them. I stood abruptly, heart hammering. I backed away from the trapdoor, from the radios, from the room itself. My flashlight quivered in my hand, illuminating nothing but the still, silent desks and filing cabinets. For a moment, it felt as if the building exhaled around me. The static subsided, but the warning lingered, vibrating in my mind, pressing against my thoughts. I didn't know if I would ever understand what it wanted me to know. The radios, the static, the cryptic warnings, they were a language older than I could read. And somewhere below, the basement waited. Patient. Silent. Watching. I left the room, leaving the radios and their warnings behind. The night was cold, the air thick, but I didn't turn back. The building had spoken, and I had heard. That was enough. Or at least, I hoped it was. I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't truly left the station behind, even after retreating from the radios. The warnings from the static clung to my mind, pressing, insistent, as if the building had imprinted them there. But the curiosity, the unease that had gripped me since I first stepped inside, refused to let go. I had to check the basement. I had to know if what the radios warned about was real. The trap door was cold beneath my fingers. The metal handle resisted my grip at first, rusted and stiff, but eventually gave way with a reluctant groan. I braced myself and lifted it. A rush of colder air escaped from below, carrying with it the same metallic tang I had smelled before. Stronger, heavier. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing stairs that descended into a black so deep it felt alive. I started down slowly, each step creaking beneath my weight. The temperature dropped as I descended, my breath forming little clouds that vanished into the shadows. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the echo of my own footsteps. That was when I heard it. Not a voice, not a hiss of static. Footsteps, faint, slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere below, moving just out of sight. I froze mid-step. My flashlight swung slightly, illuminating nothing but the concrete walls and the faint outline of old pipes. The footsteps paused whenever I paused. I could feel them, more than hear them, pressing against my senses. My heart pounded, but curiosity, stubborn and reckless, urged me forward. I moved again, careful, deliberate, step by step. The sound mirrored mine exactly, echoing with uncanny precision. I whispered a warning aloud to myself, though it felt pointless. It's just someone else here. Maybe another officer. My voice cracked, weak, but there was no answer. Only the steps, only the building, only the pressure of being watched. The basement widened into a storage area. Broken shelves lined the walls, holding boxes covered in decades of dust. My flashlight caught on something, a pile of crates that hadn't been there when I first looked. Shadows shifted behind them. My pulse spiked. I forced myself to focus. Shadows, after all, were only tricks of light. Or so I told myself. Another set of footsteps. Closer this time. Not my own, though perfectly timed with mine, echoing in the darkness. I swallowed, forcing my voice to remain steady. Who's there? Nothing. Just the soft, measured echo of someone or something moving beneath the station. I started walking along the edge of the room, keeping the flashlight pointed ahead. Every surface caught in the beam seemed to hold movement at the edge of perception. I remembered the static from the radios, the warnings about the basement. The hairs on my arms bristled. I could feel it. The sense that I was intruding into a space that wasn't meant for the living. The footsteps moved again. Slower this time, deliberate, as if whatever was making them was testing me. My palms were slick with sweat, gripping the flashlight so tightly my knuckles ached. I wanted to run, to bolt back up the stairs, but I couldn't. Something compelled me forward, a mix of dread and morbid curiosity that I couldn't explain. I reached the far end of the basement. A door, half rotted and hanging on its hinges, stood slightly ajar. The footsteps had stopped. The silence pressed in on me, heavier than before. My flashlight trembled in my grip. I raised it toward the gap. Darkness inside. Absolute. And then I saw movement, or thought I did. A shadow slipping behind the door, quick, deliberate. I swallowed, heart hammering. The building felt alive around me, watching. I realized then that the footsteps weren't just a sound. They were an awareness. A presence, deliberate and patient, gauging me, pushing me toward fear. I tried to steady my breathing. In, out. In, out. Every instinct screamed to leave, but something told me that if I ran, the station would not let me go easily. I stepped closer to the door. The air was thick now, almost viscous, carrying the scent of rust, damp concrete, and something else. Something faint, almost metallic, almost like blood. My mind reeled. The static, the warnings, the footsteps, they were all connected. The building itself was a predator, patient, shaping fear into a weapon. I peered inside. The beam caught nothing at first. Just darkness, stacked crates, the outline of shelving units. And then movement. A figure, pale, indistinct, slipped along the wall. It didn't run, didn't approach. It simply moved, like it had all the time in the world, a predator testing the edge of the unknown. My pulse spiked. My mouth went dry, I whispered to myself, trying to maintain reason. It's not real. It's fatigue. It's shadows. But the sound came again. The footsteps. Closer this time, though still just beyond the beam. My legs shook. I tried to retreat, but my feet felt heavier, slower, as if the basement itself resisted my movement. The figure moved again, closer. I could see now that it wasn't fully human. Limbs too long, posture strange, edges blurring like smoke in the corners of my vision. The footsteps were soft, but each echoed in my chest like a drumbeat. I realized with a sudden jolt that the echoes had never been mine. I hadn't been hearing my own steps. I'd been following something else. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. The figure paused, as if noting my fear. Then, just as suddenly, it vanished. My flashlight swept the room, nothing, only darkness. Only silence. Only the faint, lingering sense of being watched. I tried to rationalize. Shadows, tricks of the beam, a hallucination from exhaustion. But it didn't explain the footsteps. The deliberate, echoing steps that mirrored movement before I even took it. The sense of attention, of awareness, of patience. That wasn't fatigue. That was something else. Something waiting. I moved toward the stairs. The further I got, the more the darkness seemed to resist. Shadows stretched, twisting in unnatural ways. The echo of the steps followed me all the way, though no one could be there. I could feel them, not just behind me, but beside me, pressing from the edges of the room, reaching into my mind. Halfway up, I paused, my flashlight catching a wall covered in peeling paint. Something was written there, scratches, old, deep, deliberate. I crouched to read it. Words nearly erased by time. We watch from below. They hear, "Do not descend!" My stomach twisted. The warnings from the radios, the footsteps, the shadows. It was all connected. A language older than reason, shaped by fear, repeated in every station I had ever known. I stumbled up the remaining steps, every nerve on fire. The basement behind me seemed to exhale, and for a moment I thought I heard the faintest echo of laughter. Or was it my imagination? I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I reached the main floor, slamming the trapdoor closed behind me. The sound reverberated through the station. Silence followed, but it wasn't peace. It was waiting, patient. I leaned against the wall, shaking, trying to calm my racing thoughts. The static from the radios still hummed faintly in my memory, the warnings merging with the echo of footsteps, with the shape of the figure in the basement. I knew with a sinking certainty that the station wasn't done with me. The basement, the shadows, the echoes, they were patient. They would wait. And they would remember. I knew I had to leave. Not just for tonight, but for myself. My hands still shook. My lungs burned. My mind replayed the footsteps over and over, each step a reminder that I had glimpsed something I wasn't meant to see. Something waiting. Something alive beneath the station, patient and deliberate. I turned, heading for the exit. The night air felt like a balm, sharp and clean after the suffocating darkness. But even as I drove away, my mind stayed in that basement, listening for faint footsteps that were never far behind, feeling the weight of eyes that had watched me the entire time, knowing that I would never forget what I had heard. The air changed before I even noticed it. One moment, the station was just a cold, empty building, and the next, it felt as if the walls themselves had exhaled frost. My breath came in visible clouds, though the thermometer on the wall read nothing unusual. I rubbed my arms, trying to shake off the chill, but it didn't help. It wasn't normal cold. It was the kind that crawls into your bones, heavy and patient, weighing down every movement. I turned slowly, flashlight sweeping the hall. Everything looked the same. The peeling paint, the old desks, the scattered papers. But the atmosphere had shifted. It was alive, watching, waiting. I thought of the basement, of the footsteps I'd heard earlier, and a pang of fear struck me in the pit of my stomach. Something was here, something that didn't belong. Then I heard it. My name. Quiet at first, almost swallowed by the hum of the station's fluorescent lights. "Officer?" My head snapped toward the sound. Empty hallway, nothing, just shadows. My pulse spiked. I whispered back almost instinctively, "Who's there?" No answer. Only the faint rustle of air and the hum of the fluorescent bulbs. I moved forward cautiously, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The temperature dropped further, my jacket doing little to protect me. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the cold itself was a physical weight pressing down on me. The sound came again, clearer this time, almost right behind me. "Officer!" "Over here!" I whirled around. Empty hallway. My heart hammered. My rational mind tried to explain it. An echo, a trick of the acoustics, a breeze. But instinct screamed at me that none of those explanations fit. The cold pressed against me, sharp and deliberate, as if it had intent. I took a tentative step forward. The voice called again, a whisper threaded through the chill. "Don't leave." "Come back!" I froze. The words weren't just sound. They were pressure, curling around my skull, making it hard to think. I realized then that I wasn't alone. I was never alone. The station itself had taken notice. My flashlight flickered. Shadows seemed to stretch along the walls, reaching toward me, though I knew logically it was just the angle of the light. But my body refused to be rational. I felt watched from all sides. a cold awareness pressing into me, brushing along my skin, chilling me in a way that no room temperature ever could. I turned back toward the stairwell, trying to put distance between me and whatever lurked in the hall. My steps echoed, but the echo didn't match mine. It was slightly delayed, or maybe ahead of me, anticipating. My chest tightened. I wanted to run, but every instinct screamed to stay alert, to not provoke whatever had made this cold presence. The voice called again, closer now, layered, multiple tones overlapping. "Officer, come, stay. Don't leave." It was impossible to tell if the sounds came from a single source or many. I could feel the cold pulse in my chest, each beat synchronized with the whispers, as if the station itself had a heartbeat, and it had just found me. I remembered the radios, the static warnings about the basement. I remembered the footsteps I had followed before, echoing in ways that defied explanation. And now this, the cold, the voices, the awareness, everything was connected. The station was alive. It wasn't just a building. It was something older, patient, and it had taken notice of me. A draft passed over me, sudden and sharp, rattling the papers on the desks. I shivered violently, teeth chattering despite my jacket. The voice came again, this time almost a plea. "Don't go! Stay!" The words wrapped around my mind like smoke, pressing into every thought, every memory. I could almost see them. The shadows, the things behind the walls, just out of reach. Watching. Waiting. I stepped cautiously down the hall, trying to locate the source of the cold. My flashlight's beam cut across the walls, revealing nothing but peeling paint and broken furniture. Yet the temperature continued to drop. My breath came faster now, mist curling in front of my face. Every step felt like moving through water, resistance pressing at my legs, slowing me, holding me back. Then I saw movement, or thought I did. A shadow flitted across the far end of the hallway, faster than I could track. I froze, heart hammering. My mind tried to rationalize, a trick of the light, fatigue, imagination. But instinct screamed otherwise. The cold brushed along my neck, my ears, wrapping around me like fingers, and I knew it was intentional. I was being guided, or hunted, I whispered again, trying to assert some control. "Who's there?" The answer was immediate. A chorus of whispers layered, echoing through the hall. Here. Behind. Above. Below. I couldn't pinpoint the source. It was everywhere and nowhere, flowing through the station like wind through empty trees. My pulse raced. My stomach tightened. I backed toward the stairwell, needing escape, needing reassurance that I could leave. But the cold pressed harder, focusing now on my chest and shoulders, seizing me, reminding me that the building didn't just observe, it interacted. My flashlight flickered again. The shadows shifted with it, stretching, thickening, and I realized that I wasn't seeing them, I was feeling them. The awareness, the presence, it had weight. Another whisper directly in my ear, though no one was there. "Stay. Don't leave. Come closer." I spun around. Nothing, just shadows, just cold. My legs shook. My breath came in shallow bursts. I wanted to flee, to escape, to abandon the station entirely. But my mind, part of me, resisted. I had to know what was here. I had to survive. And to do that, I needed understanding. I moved slowly toward the source of the cold, toward the end of the hall where shadows pooled like ink. Each step was deliberate, careful. I could feel the temperature dropping with every footfall, my body tightening, muscles coiling with tension. The whispers followed, guiding me, teasing me, warning me, urging me. I couldn't tell if it wanted me to approach or retreat. I reached the far wall. My flashlight's beam caught faint scratches, etched deep into the paint. Words, though they made no sense. "They wait. Don't wake them." My pulse spiked. The cold intensified, pressing in like hands against my chest. The whispers layered into a roar in my head, a jumble of names, warnings, fragments I couldn't comprehend fully. I stumbled back. The hallway seemed to lengthen, stretching impossibly, shadows deepening. The voices called again, this time my own name, repeated over and over. "Officer, officer, officer." Each repetition was sharper, colder, insistent. I realized with a sickening clarity that the station had me. My senses, my mind, my fear. It fed on all of it. I turned and ran, desperate, toward the stairwell. The cold followed, brushing along my skin, chilling me to the core. The voices called, fragmented now, pleading, threatening, omnipresent. "Don't leave! Stay! We are here!" I slammed the trap door shut behind me as I climbed, the building seemingly sighing in response. The cold lifted slightly, but the memory remained, pressing into me, a weight I could not shake. Outside, the air was warmer, though still crisp with night. I drew a shaky breath, trying to regain control. But even as I walked to my car, the voices lingered in my mind. The cold, the awareness, the whispers, they hadn't left. The station had marked me. The presence had followed, and I knew deep down it would not release me so easily. The station was quiet when I returned to the radio room, or at least quieter than it had been all night. The cold still lingered, gnawing at my bones, and the whispering voices had never fully faded from my mind. My hands shook as I reached for the largest radio, the one that had first delivered the warnings, the one whose static had unnervingly carried my name. Something about it drew me back, a force I couldn't name. A curiosity edged with terror that I could neither ignore nor resist. I turned the dial slowly, and the static flared, filling the small room with a hiss that made my teeth ache. My breath puffed visibly in the frigid air, and I realized the temperature had dropped further than before. The cold wasn't natural. It pressed down on my shoulders, wrapped around my chest like invisible fingers, and made my pulse spike. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs as the static seemed to pulse with life, rising and falling as if it were breathing. And then it spoke. Not whispers. Not fragments of words, clear, disturbing, impossible to ignore. My own voice, distorted and stretched across the crackling airwaves, speaking words I had never said. "They are here. They wait. You cannot leave," I recoiled. My palms pressed to my ears, but the words didn't stop. The radio was no longer just a machine. It was something else. Something alive, projecting not just sound, but fear itself. I pressed my hands harder against the speaker, trying to block it out, but the words reverberated inside my skull, cutting through thought, memory, everything. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the desk. My flashlight swung wildly, casting erratic shadows across the walls. And in those shadows I saw them, shapes emerging from the corners of the room, pale and indistinct, yet aware. They didn't walk. They glided, fluid, deliberate, and their gaze, if it could be called that, felt like it pierced directly into my mind. I forced myself to focus on the radio, on the words, trying to make sense of them. "The basement. They wait. Do not come. It is too late." My blood ran cold. The footsteps I had heard earlier, the shadows I had glimpsed, the cold that had chased me down the hall, it all converged here, in this room, in this instant. And now, I was the target. The static surged violently, louder than ever, as though the radio itself were screaming. Then another voice layered on top, my name, repeated over and over, sharper and colder than before. "Officer! Officer! Officer!" It wasn't just sound. It was a weight pressing into my chest, making it hard to breathe. My vision blurred at the edges, shadows twisting and stretching as if reality itself had thinned. I reached toward the radio, hands trembling, compelled and terrified all at once. I needed to hear the message fully, to understand what it wanted me to know. I turned the volume higher and the room seemed to respond. The air thickened. The temperature plummeted further. My breath froze halfway out of my mouth. The shapes in the shadows became more defined, more deliberate, their movements synchronized with the pulse of the static. And then it happened. The final transmission. Words unlike any I had heard before, not even human, yet intelligible. "You have listened too long. You have come too far. Join us or vanish." The static surged again, deafening, and the room shuddered. I stumbled back, gripping the edge of the desk, my knuckles white. My mind reeled. The voice wasn't speaking to me. It was consuming me. Pulling me into the station, into the basement, into the darkness, I tried to flee. My legs moved, but the air seemed to resist me, thickening, compressing, as if the building itself had decided to hold me here. I glanced at the trap door leading to the basement. It gaped open, shadows spilling upward like smoke. The final message echoed in my mind. They are patient. We wait. Come. Panic clawed at me, but my feet remained rooted. My breath came in ragged bursts, my pulse hammering, and the cold pressed deeper into my bones, more insistent than anything I had felt before. The shapes in the shadows advanced, though slowly, with deliberate patience. I realized with a jolt that they weren't moving toward me. They were aligning, waiting for the final moment, watching my every hesitation, my every faltering heartbeat. The static flared one last time, and my own distorted voice screamed through it, "Do not leave! Do not resist. It is time." My vision swam, the room tilting, shadows blending with the light of my flashlight. I staggered, pressing myself against the wall, trying to anchor myself in some fragment of reality. But it slipped away. The shapes coalesced into figures, officers from past reports, faces pale and hollow, eyes empty yet fixated. I recognized some of them, names I had heard in dispatch logs, memories of vanished patrols, but they were twisted, unhuman, yet alive in some impossible sense. I could hear the basement now. Faintly at first, then unmistakably, the slow, deliberate footsteps I had followed earlier, now echoing upward as if the ground beneath me were awakening. The building hummed, resonating with the static, the cold, the presence. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to escape, to run, to fight, but I couldn't. I was trapped in the rhythm of the station, a participant in something far older and more patient than I had imagined. The final words came again, now a chant repeated in layers, echoing through the walls and inside my skull. You belong. You have always belonged. Join us or vanish. The shapes in the shadows extended toward me, fluid and patient, and the cold wrapped around my chest like a vice. I realized then that leaving was no longer an option. Not by choice, not by force. The station had claimed me. My flashlight flickered, then went out, leaving me in darkness. The cold became a presence, pressing into me, flowing around me, and I felt myself being drawn forward toward the trap door, toward the basement, toward the waiting shapes. The whispers layered over one another, my name repeated, distorted, insistent, omnipresent. I screamed, a raw, instinctive sound, but it vanished into the static unheard, and then silence. Absolute silence. The radio emitted one last burst, a garbled signal, then nothing. The station held its breath. The shadows retreated slightly, leaving only darkness and the weight of emptiness. I was gone, vanished from the room, the station, the world outside, and in the silent aftermath, the trap door to the basement stood open, waiting, patient, as if expecting the next arrival. No one found me. My car remained parked outside. The reports listed me as missing. Dispatch noted my last known location, the radio room, but nothing could explain what had happened. The building stayed, silent and unassuming to anyone who approached, hiding the events of that night, keeping its secret intact, and sometimes late at night. When the wind passes through abandoned stations like this one, faint static can be heard, a voice, distorted and layered, calling a name that no one should know. And if you listen long enough, you might hear the final message, the warning, the invitation, the cold, patient pull of a station that never forgets, that never releases, that waits for the next officer to listen too closely. I don't know when the streets got like this. I mean, I know I shouldn't have been surprised. New recruits always hear the stories, but I thought maybe it was exaggeration. Maybe the city never truly emptied. Not the way it does now. Not the way it did that night when I first walked patrol as Officer Reyes. The radio was dead. Not just quiet, it was static. That kind of hissing that seeps into your ears and makes you second guess whether it's really your headset or the world itself. I adjusted it again, telling myself it was normal, probably just interference. But the hiss wouldn't stop. It grew louder as I moved down Main Street. Empty storefronts stared at me with dark, glassy eyes, their signs swaying slightly in a wind I didn't feel on my skin. I hadn't been on night patrol before. Rookie officers usually get the lighter shifts, the ones where someone else's experience can shield you from the worst of it. But tonight I was alone. My training officer had called in sick, said something about a stomach bug, and I had no choice but to step in. The streetlights flickered above me. One by one, they blinked out, leaving behind circles of weak orange that barely touched the edges of the sidewalks. I counted them silently as I walked, my boots scraping on the asphalt. 1, 2, 3. Each one dying like a pulse, slowing in a dying body. I felt it in my chest, a subtle tightening, like something was pressing against the ribs that weren't there. I passed the old coffee shop on the corner, its windows smeared with something brown, streaks that might have been dirt, or worse. I couldn't tell in the dim light. The bell above the door didn't move. It didn't ring. It hung there like a frozen eye, watching me. I remembered a phrase from the academy. Always assume the place is dangerous until proven safe. But even as I repeated it to myself, it sounded hollow. Dangerous? Maybe, but this was something else. Something colder. A car sat in the middle of the street, headlights off, engine dead. Rust had begun to eat at the edges, and I noticed the tires were flat. Nobody was in it. Nobody had touched it in who knows how long. I passed it slowly, instinct telling me to keep moving, but my eyes kept darting back to it. There was a feeling behind it, like a shadow leaning out of the passenger window, waiting for me to look away. I forced myself to turn forward again. I heard a sound then, faint, almost shy, like someone walking far away. I paused. My hand instinctively went to my belt, fingers brushing the grip of my pistol. The sound stopped. My heart thumped hard. My throat went dry. I told myself it was the city settling, that it wasn't real, but it was real enough for me to feel it curling around my spine like a vine. I reached the intersection where the patrol route curved toward the old station. That's when I realized something was wrong. The buildings that should have been there, shops, apartments, the small grocery that stayed open too late, they were gone. Vanished. Just empty facades staring into empty streets. Windows were black holes. Doors were gaping mouths. I stopped walking. No, I couldn't stop. I had to keep moving. Training told me that. Movement was safety. Movement kept fear at bay. But each step I took sounded too loud in the silence. Each echo seemed to grow longer, twisting into shapes I didn't want to imagine. I looked down. There were no footprints behind me. Not mine. Not anyone else's. It was as if the world had forgotten I existed. I tried the radio again. Clicked the button, whispered into the mic. "This is Officer Reyes, routine patrol. Anyone copy?" Silence. Nothing but static. The same kind that had started when I left the precinct. I muttered a curse. My own voice sounded strange, tinny, like it wasn't really coming from me. The station came into view next. It should have been brightly lit, a beacon in the darkened city. But the front doors were boarded up. The windows were shattered. Paper rustled inside as though something was moving it around. I thought I saw shapes flicker inside, shadows that didn't belong to me. I stepped closer. The smell hit me first, a mix of mildew, decay, and something sharper like burnt iron. I gagged, almost turning away, but my feet kept moving. My hand reached for the handle of the door. It was cold, colder than metal should ever be. And then I realized the station had no name. The sign above the door had rotted away, leaving nothing but blank wood. I took a step back. That's when I heard it, a whisper. So soft at first, I thought I was imagining it. Then louder. "Go back." I froze. My breath puffed out in the cold air, trembling. The whisper came again, and this time I could swear it came from inside the station, from the darkness behind the shattered windows. "Go back." I didn't move. My brain screamed, "Run, run, run!" But my body stayed rooted to the cracked pavement. I couldn't explain why. It wasn't fear in the normal sense. It was something heavier, something that pressed down on my chest, making each inhale feel like lifting stones. Then I thought I saw movement behind me. Out of the corner of my eye, someone, or something, stepped into the street. A figure, thin, tall. It didn't run or move quickly. It just appeared. I spun around, nothing, just empty street. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. My instincts told me I hadn't. I swallowed hard, trying to calm the shaking in my hands. "Hello?" I called. My voice felt small, weak, swallowed by the night. No answer came. Only that same soft whisper, now seemingly all around me. "Leave. Leave now?" The sky shifted. Clouds covered the weak glow of the moon, and the shadows seemed to stretch, crawl along the buildings like living things. I noticed then that the air had grown thick, almost viscous, as though moving through it would take effort. I felt my boots sink slightly into the asphalt, the ground beneath me turning sluggish. I kept walking, had to keep walking, toward the station, because that's what my orders said. That's what my training drilled into me. Step by step, I approached the broken doors. Paper rustled behind them faster now, like someone or something was moving in rhythm with me. My shadow stretched unnaturally on the cracked concrete, twisting like a grotesque puppet. Then the whisper changed. Not just go back. Now it said my name. Reyes. I froze. That's when I realized it wasn't just the station. It was the entire street, the entire city. It knew me, and somehow I knew it too. Not consciously, not in words, but in that hollow, sinking feeling that pressed into the marrow of my bones. I reached the steps of the station. They were cracked, uneven, like they'd been there 100 years, abandoned 1,000 more. I paused at the top, looking inside the gaping black doorway. My reflection stared back at me in the shards of broken glass, eyes wide, lips tight. I couldn't tell if I was alive or already part of the shadows. I stepped forward. Just a half step. My foot touched the first threshold. The darkness seemed to pull at me, tugging gently, insistent. And then, from somewhere deep in the ruined building, I heard it. Not a whisper, a sound. A long, dragging, scraping sound like metal on metal, slow, deliberate, searching. I froze. My heart pounded. The street was silent again. I was silent. Only that sound, inside, waiting. I wanted to run, to scream, to throw myself back down the steps and out into the empty streets, but I couldn't. Not yet. Something held me. Something new I had to see. Had to know. I don't know how long I stood there. Minutes. Hours. Time had already stopped on this street. The radio still hissed. The car still sat abandoned. The shadow still watched. And I took another half step forward, and the building swallowed me in darkness. I don't know if anyone heard me call for help that night. Maybe I never did. Maybe no one was listening. Because when I turned around, the street behind me was gone. I thought the street had been the worst of it. I thought the empty city, the broken station, the whispers calling my name were all the horror I had to face. But it wasn't. Not even close. It started when I noticed the first door. I was walking down the side alley behind the station, trying to convince myself I was still on patrol, that I hadn't lost my mind, and then I saw it. A door. Ordinary, wooden, peeling white paint. The kind you see in old apartments or storage rooms. But there shouldn't have been a door there. The wall was solid brick yesterday, or at least I was sure it was. Tonight, the brick had split neatly, a rectangle in the darkness, and the door sat in it like it had always belonged. I stopped. I stared. My boots scuffed on the cracked pavement, and the air felt thicker around it, heavier, like it weighed something down that I couldn't see. I tried the radio again, whispered for backup, and got only static in return. Static that now sounded almost like murmuring. I reached for the handle. My fingers trembled. I shouldn't have done it, I knew that. But I did. The knob was cold, so cold it burned my palm when I grasped it, and the door swung open with the softest creak, just enough to make me hear it. I stepped through, the street was still there. I thought maybe nothing had changed. But then I noticed it. The street lights had shifted slightly, their glow weaker, casting longer shadows. The windows of the buildings were darker, more empty, and the air smelled different. Less mildew, more damp soil, like rain had fallen on forgotten earth. I spun around, looking for the door I'd just passed through. It wasn't there. Just the solid wall, as if it had never been. I swallowed hard. My chest tightened. My hand touched the wall where the door had been, and it was cold and solid, brick through and through. My head buzzed. My pulse raced. I took a deep breath and tried to convince myself I had imagined it. Doors. They don't just appear. Not in walls that have been standing for 100 years. Not in streets that have been abandoned for who knows how long. I kept walking, step by step, trying to push the fear down, telling myself I had a job. I had orders. I had to patrol. But every corner I turned, every shadow I passed, my eyes kept catching more doors. Doors in alleyways, doors where windows should have been. Doors in the middle of walls. All ordinary, all impossible. I hesitated at the second door. This one was narrower, painted green, scratched up, the kind of paint that chips in long curls when it's old. I stared at it. Something about it called to me. I don't know why. I felt a pull, like it knew me, like it was waiting for me to step inside. I did. The world shifted again. Not drastically, just enough to make me stumble. The street seemed longer, stretching farther than it had before. The buildings leaned slightly inward, their shadows reaching for me. The air smelled faintly of burnt paper, and I realized slowly, horrifically, that the radio static had changed. It wasn't just static now. It sounded like a voice. Not words I could understand, but syllables rising and falling, almost chanting. My own name threaded through it somewhere. I stopped walking. My reflection in the broken glass windows caught my eye. My face looked the same, but there was something wrong. Not my expression exactly, but the shadows under my eyes. They were darker, too defined, like someone had traced them with ink. My hands looked thinner. My coat hung differently on my shoulders. I touched my face, my neck. I was still me. I hoped I was still me. I kept walking, step by step, each footfall sounding too loud in the silence. Each shadow stretching unnaturally around corners, behind doors I didn't remember passing. Every door I saw made my stomach knot tighter. I wanted to avoid them, to ignore them, but I couldn't. Something deep inside told me that if I didn't go through them, I would never leave this street. I found a third door. This one was small, almost a closet door, painted black. A rusty keyhole stared at me. I leaned in closer. The keyhole wasn't empty. There was something in there. A shimmer, like water reflecting light I couldn't see. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. I opened it. The world changed again. This time it was subtle. The air grew warmer, heavier, and the faint smell of wet earth became stronger. The street curved in a way it hadn't before, leading me to a building I didn't recognize. Its doors were shut tight, its windows blank mirrors. I tried to call out into the empty street, but my voice came out small, tinny, swallowed by the quiet. I realized then that my footsteps didn't echo the way they should. There was a dampening in the air, a thickness, like someone had draped velvet over the world. Each step I took sounded muffled, like I was walking underwater. I stopped. My mind raced. The city was changing around me, but I was still moving, still walking. Was this real? Had I stepped into another layer of the street? A dream? A trap? Each door had done this. Each door had shifted the city just enough to unbalance me, to make me question what was real. I remembered what my training officer had said about stress and perception, about fear twisting reality. But this wasn't just fear. I could feel it in my bones, in my skin, that the world itself had altered. The geometry of the street was wrong. The angles of the buildings were subtly askew. Shadows clung where they shouldn't. I passed another door. This one was taller than me, painted a pale yellow with a small brass handle. I didn't want to open it. I wanted to run, to find the street that hadn't changed, to get back to anything familiar, but I couldn't. Something made me reach for it. The instant my fingers touched the handle, I felt a pull, like the door was breathing, like it had a heart. I turned it slowly. The door creaked open and I stepped inside, and the street changed again. Now the air smelled of something metallic, copper and rust. The buildings were more derelict, windows shattered, bricks crumbling. Piles of paper littered the ground. A figure passed in the corner of my eye, just a blur, and I froze. My heart raced. My hands shook. I tried to call out, but no sound came. I realized something else. Time had slowed. The shadows moved differently, almost deliberately. The city wasn't just altered. It was alive, watching, waiting. And each door I passed had been a test, a lure, pulling me deeper. I stumbled on the cracked pavement, my boots scraping on the bricks. My reflection caught again in a broken window. This time it wasn't exactly me. My eyes looked older, darker, haunted, like they had seen too much already, and this was just the beginning. I tried to turn back, but the doors weren't behind me anymore. The walls were solid again. No green, no black, no yellow doors. Just walls, solid, unyielding. I walked on, knowing the doors would keep appearing, each one pulling me further from reality, further from myself. I didn't know if there was an end. I didn't know if I could survive the street that had already survived so much, that had swallowed so many before me. And I realized something horrifying. The city wasn't empty. It was waiting, watching. And every step I took, every door I opened was leading me somewhere I didn't want to go, but somewhere I might never leave. I don't know how long I wandered. I don't know how many doors I passed, how many shifts in the world I endured, but each time I felt myself change. Not in body, not exactly, but in mind, in perception. The edges of reality blurred, shadows deepened, and the whispers, soft, almost musical now, stirred inside my head. I knew then that I couldn't trust my senses. I couldn't trust my memory. The streets, the doors, the shadows, they were all part of the same thing. Something patient, something deliberate. And it had my name, Reyes. I kept walking, step by step, door by door, knowing I couldn't stop, and knowing deep down that the next door would change everything again. I thought I was alone. I really did. After the doors, after the shifting streets, I told myself I had to keep moving, that fear was the only enemy I had left. But I wasn't alone. It started with a sound. At first, I thought it was my boots echoing off the cracked pavement, but there was something off. A second set of steps matching mine exactly. Not slightly behind, not slightly ahead, but perfectly synchronized. Step, step, step! Like a metronome keeping pace with my heartbeat, I froze. My hand went to my belt, brushing against the pistol. The sound didn't stop. It didn't falter. Each footfall behind me sounded the same, solid, deliberate. I turned slowly. Empty street, nothing, not a shadow, not a person. Nothing but the silence of the city and the faint rustle of leaves in alleys I couldn't remember seeing before. I shook my head. I whispered to myself, "You're imagining it. It's the stress. It's the doors. It's exhaustion." My voice sounded weak, tinny in the thick air. Still, the steps didn't stop. They matched me exactly. When I slowed, they slowed. When I quickened, they quickened. I started walking faster, heart pounding. Every instinct screamed to run, to find light, to get back to something familiar. But the streets stretched endlessly, curving slightly with every turn, buildings leaning in just enough to block my view of any horizon. The steps followed, close, comfortably close, almost mocking. I tried to listen for anything else, traffic, distant voices, but there was nothing. Just the steps, step, step, matching mine. My hands shook. My breath came in short, ragged bursts. I thought of my family, of the mornings before the academy when my mother called me for breakfast, and my father hummed in the kitchen. I clung to those memories like a life raft. They felt impossibly distant. I ducked into a narrow alley, hoping to lose the sound, hoping to trick whatever it was. But it didn't change. Step, step, always the same. I pressed myself against the wall, staring down the alley. Empty. Nothing moved. My mind screamed, "It's not real. You're alone. You're alone." But I could hear it. I could feel it. And I knew I wasn't alone. I thought of the doors. Maybe this, whoever, whatever it was, had followed me through them. I shivered. Each door had warped the city, twisted reality just enough to disorient me. Maybe it had warped something else too. Maybe it had warped me. Maybe it had invited this presence into my life. I forced myself to move again, stepping onto the cracked pavement. I told myself to keep my head down, to focus on the rhythm of my own steps, to ignore the echo. But it was impossible. Step for step, I quickened, hoping to outrun it. My boots pounded harder on the asphalt. My lungs burned. Step, step. It didn't break. It never broke. I turned a corner sharply, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever it was. My eyes strained in the dim light, darting to shadows, windows, broken doorways. But the street was empty, clean, deceptively empty. The steps, though. They remained. I started talking to it, whispered, almost pleading. "Who's there?" My voice trembled. "What do you want?" Silence answered me. Only the steps. Step, step, echoing everything I did. I remembered something from my academy days, training about auditory hallucinations under extreme stress, about stress-twisting perception, about fear-fabricating threats. I tried to tell myself it was just my mind. I tried to tell myself I was hallucinating, but when I slowed to a halt, the echo did the same. Step, step. It copied me too perfectly. Panic started clawing at the edges of my consciousness. I could feel sweat running down my back, cold and sticky beneath my coat. My throat was dry. My fingers trembled on my belt. I wanted to run, but I didn't know which way. Every street curved. Every alley looked the same. The buildings leaned, stretched, twisted in ways that made me dizzy. And through it all, step, step, keeping pace. I stumbled, almost fell, and the sound paused. For a heartbeat. I looked over my shoulder. Nothing. The street was empty. But then the steps resumed, louder, heavier, deliberate. Step, step, I ran. My boots pounded the broken pavement, my lungs screaming for air I couldn't catch. Step, step, matching me, matching my panic, matching my terror. It wasn't just following. It was learning me, anticipating me, echoing every move. I remembered the first door I had gone through, the pull it had given me. Maybe this presence was connected to the doors. Maybe it had been waiting behind them, patient. Maybe it had been part of the city all along. The thought made bile rise in my throat. I couldn't stop. I couldn't even look back. Step, step. I forced myself to turn a corner, hoping for a streetlight, a sign, anything to orient myself. The streetlights flickered weakly. Shadows clung closer to the buildings now, stretching unnaturally. I could feel eyes in them, though I knew I couldn't see any. The steps followed. Step, step, always matching, I shouted, not knowing why. Not knowing if anything could hear me. Show yourself! My voice cracked. The echo didn't respond. Only the steps. Step, step. And then for the briefest moment, I thought I heard a second voice, low and far away, whispering my name. Reyes. I choked on my own fear. My mind raced. Maybe it was a voice from a memory, a hallucination. Maybe it was my own mind turning on me, but I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape the sound. I tried to sprint, thinking that if I moved faster, maybe it would lose me, but the steps didn't falter. They matched every stride, every stumble, every desperate, ragged movement. I ran until my legs burned and my lungs felt ready to collapse. Step, step, still matching me, matching my desperation. I had to hide. I had to find somewhere to disappear. I ducked into an alleyway, pressing myself against the wall, hoping to disappear into shadow. I held my breath. Listened. Nothing. Silence. For a moment, I dared to hope. I exhaled slowly, listening. And then, step, step, right behind me. I screamed. A raw, ragged sound that startled even me. My hands gripped my belt so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My head whipped around. Empty alley. Empty street. But the sound, it came from everywhere. Inside my head, in the street, in the air around me. Step, step, echoing, consuming. I stumbled out of the alley and onto the main street. My eyes darted wildly. Every shadow, every dark window seemed alive. The city had changed again, subtly. Buildings leaned, pavement cracked in new patterns, and doors. Doors appeared where there hadn't been any. My heart sank. I knew what was coming. I didn't want to go through another door. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream until my voice broke. But the steps followed. Step, step. They matched me perfectly. And I knew. I couldn't outrun them. I reached the first door I had opened. Its peeling white paint seemed to gleam unnaturally in the dim light. My hand trembled as I touched the handle. Step, step, behind me. I swallowed hard. The echo was patient, waiting. I turned the knob and stepped through. The world shifted just slightly like the last time. The street curved differently. The shadows twisted. The air smelled damp and faintly metallic. And the steps were still there. Step, step, matching me. I realized then that this presence wasn't just following me. It was part of the city. It was in the air, in the walls, in the cracks of the pavement. It didn't need to show itself. It only needed to walk and I would hear it. Step for step, breath for breath, heartbeat for heartbeat. I don't know how long I walked that night, how many doors I passed, how many echoes of myself I left behind. But the steps never stopped. Step, step, always echoing, always reminding me that I was not and could never be truly alone. I stopped again, my back against a wall, staring into the darkened street. The city waited. The shadows waited. And the steps kept pace with me. I whispered, almost to myself, almost as a prayer, "Please, make it stop." And in the distance, I thought I heard the faintest, softest click of another door opening. Step, step. The night felt heavier than usual. I didn't notice it at first, not until I passed the first building with shattered windows, and the shapes inside caught my attention. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, my reflection bouncing off broken glass. But then I saw a pale face pressed against the cracked pane. Eyes wide, hollow, staring. Mouth open in a silent scream. I froze, boots scraping on the asphalt. My hands went to my belt, but my pistol felt useless, like a child's toy. The face didn't move in any normal way. It was still, and yet alive. Watching me, waiting. I blinked. When I opened my eyes again, the face was closer, as if it had leaned forward while I wasn't looking. The mouth didn't move. The scream didn't make a sound. And yet I could hear it. A whisper in my mind, faint, desperate, "Help!" I swallowed hard, trying to convince myself it was a reflection, a trick of shadow and broken glass. But the longer I stared, the more I realized there were others. Faces, pressed to every window I passed, flickering in and out of existence. Some were pale, some hollow, some looked familiar. One face made my stomach turn. I could have sworn it was mine. Eyes wide, hair slicked back with sweat, lips parted in silent horror. I staggered back, almost tripping over my boots. My reflection didn't match what I saw. My own body was still me, but the face in the window. It was me and it wasn't. I tried to run, telling myself I had to get past them, had to move. But the streets were twisting again, curving in ways I didn't recognize. Buildings leaned inward. Broken signs swayed silently above me. And every time I turned, more faces appeared, pressed to glass, staring, watching, judging, waiting. One face reached out. A hand, pale, thin, pressed against the window from inside. Fingers stretched like they were trying to grab me, but there was nothing to touch. My pulse jumped. My throat went dry. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. My own voice seemed swallowed by the city, devoured by the shadows that clung to the walls and corners. I stumbled backward, pressed against a brick wall. The face didn't stop. Its mouth remained open in that silent scream, eyes wide and burning into me. I could feel its desperation, its fear. Not anger, fear. And it wasn't alone. Every window now had faces, pressing closer, reaching out, mouths moving in silent horror. I covered my eyes with my hands, trying to shut them out. "It's not real. It's not real. It's not real." I whispered it over and over, but when I lowered my hands, they were still there, waiting, watching. Some faces twisted in agony, some in despair, and some smiled, faint, cruel, knowing. I remembered the doors, the streets, the echoes of steps that followed me. I realized with cold certainty that the city itself was alive. It wasn't empty. It never had been. It waited, it watched, it collected, and now it wanted something from me. Or maybe wanted me. I forced myself to move. Step by step toward the next building. Another window shattered. Another face appeared. Closer. I could see the hollow edges of its eyes, the stretched fingers pressing against glass. And then it blinked. Not me, not a normal blink, but a slow, deliberate, unnatural closing of the eyes as if it were sizing me up, testing me. I tried to tell myself it was imagination, but it wasn't. I could feel it in my bones, in my pulse, in the sweat running down my back. This wasn't a trick of the mind. This was something else, something patient, something deliberate, something hungry. I stumbled into the street. The echoes of my footsteps didn't stop. Step, step, matching me, always matching me. And the faces? They followed. Not just in the windows now, but in the reflections, in the glass shards scattered on the pavement. Every reflection held a pale, desperate face. My face, not mine, someone else's. Something else's. I tried to speak, to call out, but the sound came out broken, tinny, swallowed by the thick air. The faces leaned closer. One pressed its hand against the glass so hard that I could see the outline of its bones beneath pale skin. I wanted to look away. I couldn't. I couldn't stop staring. I remembered my training, remembered the basics: calm, observe, assess. But none of that mattered. Nothing mattered. The city had swallowed it all. Logic, rules, sense, reality, and the faces. They were the city's eyes now, watching me, reaching for me, whispering in silence. I forced myself to keep moving, step by step, toward the flickering streetlights, toward anything that might be familiar. But the faces didn't relent. One in particular followed me, its eyes fixed on mine through every reflection, through every shard of glass. Its mouth opened wider than possible in that silent, eternal scream. I tripped on rubble. My knees scraped against the asphalt. I tried to crawl forward. Step, step. The echo didn't falter. I glanced up. The face was closer, not pressed to a window now, not behind glass. It hung in the corner of my vision, pale and distorted, reaching toward me. Its eyes, I couldn't hold them. Too hollow, too desperate. I remembered my mother calling me for breakfast when I was 12. I remembered the way sunlight used to fall across her hair. I remembered the sound of my father humming in the kitchen. I clung to those memories like a lifeline, but the city laughed at them. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe it was just waiting for me to let go. I stumbled to my feet. The faces receded slightly, slipping back into the windows, back into the glass, but I knew they were still there, watching, waiting, and I knew one would reach for me again. It was only a matter of time. I pressed forward, boots scraping on the cracked pavement. The street twisted again. Buildings leaned closer. Windows shattered. Faces appeared in every reflection, every pane, every fragment of glass. Step, step. My echo followed me, matching me, reinforcing the rhythm of fear that had rooted itself in my chest. I passed one window that made me stop cold. It wasn't a face. It was me. Pressed against the glass, eyes wide, mouth open in the same silent scream I had seen before. And it moved when I moved, reached when I reached, blinked when I blinked, I gagged, pressed my hands to my mouth. My own reflection. Not my reflection. Some twisted version, some echo, some specter. And then it smiled. Not kindly, not humanly, but knowingly, cruelly, like it had been waiting for me all along. I forced myself to keep moving, step by step. Faces in the windows followed, reaching, screaming, silent, always silent. And I knew that if I stopped, if I looked away, if I fell, they would come for me. Not just watch, not just whisper, but take. The street twisted again. A new window appeared. A new face, pale, desperate, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. Its hand pressed against the glass. Fingers thin and reaching. I could see the shadows of bones beneath its skin. I could feel its cold breath through the pain. I swallowed hard, forcing my legs to move. Step by step, step by step. The echoes of my own footsteps kept pace. Step, step. The faces leaned closer. One leaned so close I could feel the brush of glass against my cheek. Its mouth opened wider, and I realized I could hear it faintly now. Not with my ears, not really, but in my mind, a whisper. Reyes! I stumbled, almost fell. My hands shook. I could feel every face following, every eye, every silent scream pressing into me, trying to push me to my knees. I forced myself to my feet. Step by step, step by step. Keep moving. Don't stop. I don't know how long I walked, how many streets I passed, how many windows I faced. The faces were endless. The streets twisted. The echoes followed. Step, step, always matching, always reminding me that I was not alone, that I never had been, that the city watched, waited, and collected, and I realized then that I couldn't stop. I couldn't fight. I couldn't hide. The faces, the windows, the echoes, they were part of me now. Part of my patrol, part of my life, part of something that had been waiting for me long before I ever stepped foot into the city. Step, step. The echo followed, step, step. The faces watched, step, step. And I knew that somewhere, behind another shattered window, another silent scream waited for me. I thought the city had claimed me already. Thought the streets, the doors, the faces in the windows, the echoes of steps, they had taken everything. But I kept moving. Step by step, door by door, desperate for something solid, something real. I reached the last door I could remember, the one that had appeared almost at random, its paint peeling, hinges rusted, handle cold under my palm. My legs ached. My lungs burned. My chest felt hollow, as though the city had reached inside me and removed something essential. I didn't care. I just wanted out. I turned the knob. The door swung open easily, much too easily, and I stepped through. The world shifted. The air smelled different, cleaner, almost neutral. The oppressive weight that had pressed against my chest lifted, but only slightly, like a hand withdrawing just enough to let me breathe, but not enough to escape. The street before me looked familiar, or as familiar as anything had been since I began this patrol. Broken asphalt, leaning buildings, shattered windows, but it was quieter, stiller. I ran toward the station, my boots hitting the pavement hard. My heart drummed in my chest. I expected the doors, the faces, the steps to follow. I expected the city itself to push back against me, to resist my escape. But nothing. Silence. The kind that presses into your ears and makes your own heartbeat sound loud and alien. The station came into view. My relief almost made me laugh. Finally something tangible, something real. I ran up the steps. The doors, broken yet intact, stood before me. I reached for the handle, pushing it open with trembling hands. Inside, the station looked normal. At least normal enough. Desks, chairs, filing cabinets. Dust coated every surface, thick but not unnatural. My radio sat on the counter, dead and silent. The lights flickered faintly, humming with life. I leaned against the counter, pressing my forehead into my hands. I had made it. I had survived. Or so I thought. I stepped outside again, planning to follow the patrol route back to the precinct, to somewhere familiar. The street stretched before me. At first glance, it looked as it should. Street lights glowed weakly. Sidewalks cracked in the usual patterns. Buildings leaned just enough to suggest age, but the street signs were wrong. Names I didn't recognize, names that shouldn't exist. I stopped walking. My stomach tightened. My hands trembled. I reached for my phone, hoping to see a map, GPS, anything. The screen lit up. The location blinked at me in a way that made my blood run cold. I wasn't anywhere I should be. Not anywhere real. Not anywhere mapped, not anywhere marked. The street I had just walked, the station I had just entered, they didn't exist. According to every map, every app, every satellite image, the city ended miles back. Just empty land, trees, open sky, nothing more. I stumbled backward. My pulse raced. My chest felt tight again. Step by step, I retraced my path. Nothing matched. No familiar intersections, no streetlights, no doors. The city I had patrolled, the streets I had walked, the echoes and faces, they were gone. And yet, I remembered. I remembered everything. I remembered the first empty street. The first door that shouldn't exist. The steps behind me that mirrored mine. The faces pressed to windows, mouths open in silent screams. All of it. Every detail burned into my memory. I screamed into the night, raw and ragged. No one answered. Not a sound. The air seemed to swallow my voice. My own ears rang from the effort. And still I knew the city was there, waiting. Somewhere. Always waiting. I stumbled forward, unsure whether I was moving in circles or straight lines. Every street looked different. Every building leaned at impossible angles. Windows reflected nothing, or sometimes something I didn't recognize. My own face twisted in ways I didn't remember. I tried to run. I didn't care where. Any direction that promised familiarity, even if I had to fight the twisted streets and impossible architecture. But the city wasn't finished with me. The shadows clung closer now. The air grew thick again, heavy with expectation. I passed what looked like the corner I had started from. And there it was. A window. Shattered, cracked. And in it, a face, pale, hollow, staring. Mouth open in that silent scream I had come to dread. I stumbled backward, pressed my hands to my face, forced myself to move on, step by step. Step by step, I thought of my family. My mother calling me for breakfast. My father humming. I tried to anchor myself to those memories, but they felt distant, fragile, like thin paper in a storm. And the city, it laughed at my memories. Not cruelly, not maliciously, but patiently, eternally, waiting, watching, collecting. I walked. I don't know for how long. Hours, maybe days. Time had no meaning here. The streets twisted, the buildings leaned, and new doors appeared where none should have been. Faces in windows stared. Hands reached. Silent screams pressed into my mind. I tried to leave. Every street I turned, every corner I rounded led back to the station, or what should have been the station. The one I had entered, and yet it was different. Not the same. Shattered differently, empty differently, familiar and alien at once. I tried to call for backup again. Radio dead. Phone dead. My own voice swallowed by the thick air. I realized with a sinking certainty that no one would come. Not now. Not ever. I passed a window and caught my reflection. My face was pale, eyes wide. The hollow shadows beneath them deepened. Lips cracked from dry air. I blinked, and the reflection didn't. The eyes in the glass stared at me, unblinking, waiting. I turned quickly. Step by step. Step by step, I tried to run. Tried to find an exit. Tried to find the real city. But the streets had changed again. Curved, twisted, nothing aligned. Signs were wrong. No building matched the maps. No intersection made sense. And then I realized the worst part. I had become part of the city. Not a visitor, not a patrol officer. Part of it. My footsteps, my memory, my fear, they were woven into the streets, into the shadows, into the doors and windows and echoes. I stopped, pressed my back to a brick wall, trembling. The station behind me, the streets around me, the echoes and faces, they were all waiting. I could feel them, patient, deliberate, watching, knowing, collecting. I remembered my first day, walking the empty streets as a rookie, thinking it was just fear, thinking the city was empty. I laughed bitterly at the memory. Empty? It had never been empty. It had been waiting, waiting for someone like me to step in, to walk, to follow, to see. I tried to call my own name, to remind myself I existed outside of this nightmare. "Reyes!" I shouted, voice ragged, cracking. Silence answered me. The shadows stretched. The buildings leaned. The air pressed against my chest. Step by step, the city moved with me, matching me, mocking me. I realized then that there was no exit. No map, no reality beyond these twisted streets. I could leave the station. I could walk for what felt like miles, but the city had no edges. No end. Only streets, doors, faces, echoes. And it waited. Always waited. I stumbled to the ground, hands on the pavement, trying to breathe. Step by step, the sound followed. My own footsteps mirrored back at me, a metronome of fear. I looked up. Windows, broken, cracked. Faces pressed to glass. Mouths open in silent screams. Hands reaching, all watching, waiting. I tried to tell myself I could leave, that one step, one door, one decision could get me back. But deep down, I knew it was a lie. The city wasn't real in the sense I had known reality. It had never been. It was a trap. A living thing. Patient. Eternal. And I was caught. I stood slowly, legs trembling, and took another step. Step by step, I turned another corner. The station appeared. Behind it, streets twisted impossibly. The windows held faces. Hollow, pale, desperate. Mouths open in silent screams. Hands reached. Step by step, my echo followed me. I tried to shout, to call for help, to remind myself of the world outside. Nothing came. Only the city. Only the station. Only the streets. Only the faces. Only me I walked. Step by step. The night stretched on, endless. The city had no name. No map, no exit. Only streets, faces, doors, echoes, and I was lost to it. I had walked into it, followed it, and it had claimed me. Step by step, it waited. Step by step, I walked. Step by step, the city collected me into its endless night. I shouldn't have been alone that night. But somehow, it always comes down to me. Just me, walking these endless corridors that smell like bleach and old paint, with the hum of fluorescent lights overhead that never seem steady. They flicker, always flicker, and I swear, sometimes it feels like they're breathing. The hallway stretched out before me, pale walls lined with scuffed linoleum, the air stiff with the scent of disinfectant and the faint iron tang of something I can't name. I told myself it was just nerves, that the building was old and that old wiring does this. But the moment the lights sputtered, just for a second my heart jumped. and I caught a shadow moving where no shadow should be. I froze. My hand, resting on the radio clipped to my belt, twitched like it had a life of its own. There was a rhythm to the flickering. 1, 2, pause, 1, pause, 2. And in that rhythm, I could have sworn the darkness was trying to form words. My mind raced. I knew better than to imagine things, yet my instincts screamed that something was wrong. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun, gun up, and saw nothing. Nothing but the long stretch of hallway, empty and silent. I told myself again it was the building settling, but I didn't move for a long moment. I listened, counting the seconds between the hum of the lights and the faint thump of something, I couldn't tell what, moving somewhere deep inside these walls. The flicker came again, brighter this time, and for a heartbeat, I saw them. Faces. Faces pressed against the glass of the windows along the hallway, twisted, distorted, eyes wide, mouths frozen in silent screams. I blinked, and they were gone. The hallway was empty. My stomach turned. I told myself it was a trick of the light, my imagination running too far, but the panic in my chest felt too real. I started walking carefully, slowly, telling myself I was just checking the floor. Every step felt louder than it should, echoing like a drumbeat in a cathedral. Shadows stretched along the walls, long fingers reaching for me, stretching and shrinking with every flicker. I could almost feel them, these dark, waiting things, pressing just beyond the edge of vision. My hand brushed against the wall, cold and slick, and I almost stumbled back, the sensation crawling under my skin. The radio crackled, a whisper of static, and I jumped. I pressed my finger to the button. "Unit 4, are you there?" My voice sounded wrong to me, too loud, too shaky. No answer, just the flicker overhead. And then, as if in response, a light overhead went out entirely. Darkness swallowed the hallway for a second that stretched too long. I felt my heart hammering in my throat, my breath shallow. When the light flickered back, the hallway seemed different, longer, wider. I didn't move my feet, but the stretch of wall in front of me seemed endless. The paint was peeling more than before. The linoleum cracked like it had been through years of fire and neglect. The air smelled warmer now, heavy, like it had collected years of fear in its corners. I knew I was imagining it. I had to be. Then I saw it, a shadow that didn't belong. A figure standing just past the next flickering light, still, almost blending into the darkness. I froze. I tried to convince myself it was another officer, or maybe a janitor, but something about the way it didn't move, the way it waited, told me it was neither. My chest tightened. I swallowed. The figure didn't blink. It didn't breathe. It just watched. I forced myself forward, step by step, my shoes scuffing against the linoleum, each sound deafening in the oppressive silence. The figure stayed there, unmoving, always at the edge of vision. When the light flickered again, I saw it clearer, and the air went cold, sharp against my skin, like I had walked into a freezer. Its face, I can't describe it. Not really. Something human, but wrong, like it had been stretched, pulled, a painting smeared over glass. My stomach churned. I swallowed again, the taste of bile in my mouth. I tried to call it out, to break whatever spell this hallway had on me. "Hey, who's there?" My voice cracked, and the sound bounced off the walls and back to me, distorted. The figure didn't answer. I didn't expect it to. Something inside me knew there would be no answer, no explanation. Just the hallway, the flickering lights, and that sense of being watched, of being counted, of being waited for. The lights above me stuttered, flickering faster now, more erratically, like they were reacting to me, to my fear. And then I realized something worse. The shadows weren't just following the edges of the walls. They were moving closer. Not crawling, not slinking, they were stretching, reaching, creeping toward me in the corners of my vision. I could see them tugging at the edges of reality, pulling the hallway into some impossible shape I didn't understand. My breath caught. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to shrink from it, trying to disappear, but the shadows didn't care. I told myself I had to keep moving. I had to make it to the end of the hall. There had to be an exit, a door, a light that stayed on. But the end seemed to stretch farther every second. My legs ached. My chest burned. Every flicker of light made the shadows twitch and lunge, and I could feel them grazing my skin, whispering, brushing past my mind. I could hear faint whispers in the static of my radio, voices I didn't know, speaking words that made my teeth ache. A door appeared, half open, light spilling out. Relief surged, but it was shallow, almost cruel. As I stepped toward it, the floorboard behind me creaked again, louder this time, like a drum signaling something behind me. I turned too late. The figure had moved. It was closer, not just in the shadows, but in the hallway itself. No longer at the edge, no longer waiting. Its face, I can't remember clearly, but the terror it held is burned into my memory. Something that should be human, but wasn't. I ran. I didn't care about procedure, about protocol, about the officer's calm I was supposed to have. I ran. The hallway twisting around me, the lights flickering faster, until I couldn't tell which way was forward. The walls seemed to close, then stretch, then close again. Every shadow, every flicker, every crack of light felt alive, felt hungry. My heart was in my throat, my lungs on fire. I could hear it behind me now, moving with me, matching my steps. And then silence. Just for a second, the lights stilled. The shadows froze. The air was thick, pressing on me. I stopped, my chest heaving. The hallway ahead looked normal, almost dull. Too normal. I couldn't move my legs, couldn't breathe. I dared a glance behind me. Nothing. Just the hallway. Empty. I didn't wait to think. I ran the rest of the way, past the flickering lights, past the peeling walls, past the shadows that might have been real, or maybe only in my mind. I didn't stop until I reached the stairwell, the familiar fluorescent hum above grounding me, giving me something solid. I leaned against the railing, gasping, trying to tell myself I had imagined it, that it was just the lights, just the building, just stress. But I know better. Even now. I can't forget the way the shadows moved, the way the hallway stretched, the way that figure waited, patient and still, in the corner of my vision. I know the lights will flicker again, and when they do, I'll see it. I'll feel it. I'll remember that hallway, and how it wasn't just a hallway. Something waits there, always waiting, always watching. And the lights, they know? I should have known better than to check that office. I really should have. The building was empty, silent except for the low hum of the old air system and the occasional creak of settling walls. But something about that locked door kept calling me, not with a sound I could hear, but with a feeling, deep in my chest, like it was breathing just for me. The office door was at the end of a narrow corridor. The paint chipped and faded, the kind of place you pass every day without thinking. But tonight it looked different, heavier, darker, like it was holding something inside, and whatever it was didn't want to be found. I stood in front of it, my gloved hand hovering over the handle, cold, unnatural cold. My breath fogged in the hallway, and I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I tried the handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. That shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. The kind of surprise that sends a shiver down your spine. I tapped lightly, thinking maybe someone was inside. A reply would have been normal. A knock, a cough, but nothing. Just silence. And then a sound, breathing, slow, low, right behind the door. I froze. My first thought was that it was someone hiding, playing a prank. Maybe one of the officers who thought this old building was a good place for scares. But the sound was wrong. Too steady, too deliberate. I could hear it in the pitch of my own fear, vibrating through the door into my chest. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Steady, heavy, deliberate. Not human. I pressed my ear to the door. The air on the other side was warmer than it should have been, like the room was alive. I could feel it pressing against my skin. My stomach churned. I wanted to step back, to run, but my feet were rooted, my body betraying me, forcing me to stay. The sound didn't stop. It didn't hesitate. It was patient, waiting for me to listen. I whispered through the door. Hello? My voice sounded small, ridiculous even to me. No answer. Just that breathing. I could feel it through the door, felt it in the tiles under my shoes, in the walls pressing in. Something was in there. Something breathing. Something that didn't belong. I tried again, a little louder this time. Is someone there? The sound stopped, my chest clenched. I swallowed. I told myself it was nothing, just the air system, just nerves, but my fingers tingled against the doorknob. Something wanted me to open it. I could feel it, pulling at me, like a current in water. I shook my head, trying to convince myself, but the pull didn't fade. It grew stronger with every heartbeat. I tried to step away, but my legs refused. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to walk away, to never come back. But my hands moved on their own, brushing the cold metal handle, twisting it, trying the lock again. Locked. The door didn't budge. I could feel the breath on the other side, like it was trying to press through the wood, reach me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to smash the door down and see what was inside, but fear held me frozen. And then it happened. The breathing changed. A shift, subtle but undeniable. Faster now, shallow, controlled, but almost impatient. My stomach dropped. I knew it was aware of me. Knew I was standing there trembling. I could feel its gaze through the wood. And that's when I heard it. A whisper. Not words, not a language I knew, but something that scraped at the edges of my mind. A rasping sound, low, deliberate. It slid into my thoughts, curling around the fear I had been trying to keep at bay. I stumbled back, my hand flying from the doorknob, heart hammering, eyes wide. My voice caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I could only listen. The whisper became a rhythm, echoing with the breathing. In, out, rasp. In, out, rasp. Like a song I had never learned but somehow understood. Something alive, ancient, patient, and hungry. My mind screamed at me to leave, to run, but the pull from that door wouldn't let me. It wasn't just curiosity. It wasn't just fear. It was something older, something darker, demanding attention. I forced myself to look around, to see the hallway, the peeling paint, the scuffed tiles, anything real, anything normal. But the office door, it wasn't normal. It was blacker than it should have been. Not shadowed, not dimmed, black, empty. It drank the light around it, pulled it in, leaving the edges of the hallway dull and gray. My stomach churned. I felt like a moth trapped against a flame. I reached for my radio, hoping for a voice. Unit 4 to dispatch. Check the... My words stopped in my throat. The whisper cut through, slicing the air. It wasn't coming from inside the office. It was everywhere. Surrounding me. Inside my ears. Inside my head. A voice I could not place. A rhythm that mirrored my pulse. My hands shook. The radio slipping to the floor. I bent to pick it up, but when I straightened, the door moved just a fraction. A shift in the frame. A tilt that shouldn't have happened. My breath caught in my throat. I could see darkness spilling from the crack beneath the door. Not shadow, not light, but something else. Liquid black, moving with intent, pooling slightly on the floor, creeping closer. I wanted to step back, to scream, to leave, but my body refused. I was rooted, trapped in place, a witness to something I could not name. The breathing grew louder now, filling the hallway. I could feel it in my chest, in my throat, in the blood in my ears. Each exhale a pulse of darkness. And then the whisper returned. Closer now, a rasping hiss curling around my thoughts, calling my name in a voice I knew I shouldn't know. I staggered back, hand pressed against the wall, sweat running down my face. The pull from the office didn't weaken. It coiled around me, tethering me to that door. My fingers itched, trembling, as if they wanted to turn the knob to see what was inside. I fought it. Every fiber of my being screamed to stop, to run, to tear myself away. But the desire was stronger than fear, stronger than reason. I could feel it. Something waiting, patient, endless. Something that wanted me to see, wanted me to remember, I whispered back. A broken, shaky sound. Who's there? The reply was immediate. A rasping, wet sound, like air through a throat not meant for breathing. My ears rang. My stomach lurched. My mind screamed, and yet I understood. I didn't understand words, but I understood intent. Waiting, watching, hunger. Something inside that office was alive in a way that defied reason. It had no shape, no form, no morality, only presence. And it was aware of me. I stumbled, nearly collapsing against the wall. The pull lessened, but only because I forced myself to step back. The office door remained still, unyielding, but the darkness lingered, seeping into the hallway like smoke. I could feel it in my lungs, my chest, my skin. I could hear it in the quiet between the hum of the lights, between the cracks of the floorboards. It didn't leave. It would not leave. I ran then. I didn't look back. Not because I didn't want to, but because I feared what I might see if I did. The hallway stretched normally again, the lights steady, the air cold and sharp. But I knew the office was there at the end of the hall, waiting. Its door locked, its darkness patient, its breath steady. And I knew deep down that it would always be there, whispering, breathing, waiting for someone foolish enough to come close. Even now, when I close my eyes, I hear it, low, steady, patient, a reminder that some doors are locked for a reason, that some rooms hold things older than fear, older than time, waiting silently behind darkness, and that some curiosity can never be satisfied. It started with a feeling, the kind that creeps up your spine before you even realize you're afraid. I had walked these halls countless times, each step familiar, each shadow accounted for. But tonight it felt different, wrong. Every muscle in my body tightened, my skin crawling like I had stepped into a place that didn't want to be entered. The lights overhead flickered, sputtered, and went out completely, leaving me in absolute darkness. I froze. My ears strained trying to find something, anything, but there was nothing. Not a hum from the ventilation, not the faint scrape of shoes in the distance. Silence had weight tonight, heavy and suffocating, pressing against my chest. My heart thumped in a rhythm that felt too loud, echoing inside my skull. I told myself it was just the power, old wiring, maybe a blown fuse, logical explanations to cling to, but my gut screamed at me otherwise. The darkness wasn't empty. It wasn't just absence of light. It was thick, almost solid, pressing in from every corner, curling around me like a living thing. And I felt it first as a prickling at the back of my neck, then a weight in my chest, and finally the unmistakable certainty that I was not alone. I couldn't see anything, but I knew. I could feel it in my bones, watching, waiting, something unseen, patient, observing every tremor of fear that passed through me. My flashlight, clutched in my hand, felt useless. I didn't want to turn it on. I didn't want to see it. Because I already knew it was there, always there, just out of sight, just out of reach. I took a step. My foot scuffed against the floor, and the sound reverberated like a cannon. My breath caught in my throat. I should have turned back. I should have run. But something anchored me to that spot. A mix of curiosity and terror, a need to confront it, even though every fiber of my being screamed not to. The darkness seemed to pulse around me. Shapes shifted, just at the edge of my perception. Shadows that weren't shadows. Forms that shouldn't exist. My mind tried to explain it. Optical illusions, fatigue, nerves. But the feeling of being watched didn't relent. If anything, it intensified. It pressed in closer, breathing with me, matching my heartbeat, waiting for the perfect moment. I whispered, though I don't know why. "Hello?" My voice sounded wrong. Too loud in the quiet, yet fragile, swallowed immediately by the darkness. No answer. Nothing but that suffocating, unseen gaze. I tried to convince myself it was just fear, just imagination, but I knew better. This was real. Not physical, not tangible in a normal sense, but as real as my pounding heart and the sweat running down my back. I moved again, slow, careful, every step measured. My flashlight flickered once, weakly, and in that instant I thought I saw eyes. Just a glimpse, barely there, reflecting something I can't describe. I blinked and they were gone. I blinked again, still gone. But the sensation lingered, burning into my mind. Eyes that weren't human, watching, patient, relentless. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I tried to remember my training, to remind myself that fear was a tool, that darkness was just a lack of light. But every rational thought was drowned by the certainty in my chest. I was being hunted, not in the sense of flesh and bone, but in the way the mind can be hunted. I could feel it probing, testing, learning the contours of my fear. A sound broke the silence, soft, almost imperceptible at first. A whisper, maybe a movement shifting closer. My flashlight flickered again, weakly illuminating the hallway, and for a second, I saw the walls. Peeling paint, cracked tiles, the familiar layout, but something had changed. Angles seemed wrong, corners too sharp, shadows too deep. And I knew it wasn't the building, it was him, or it, or whatever it was. Waiting, watching, learning. I stopped, holding my breath, listening. The whispering continued, faint but deliberate, curling around my ears, touching places deep in my mind I didn't want exposed. I tried to shake it off, tried to tell myself it was nothing, but the pressure didn't fade. The feeling of unseen eyes drilled into my skull, unrelenting, omnipresent. I backed up slowly, my hands trailing along the walls for guidance, but the walls weren't where they should have been. Or maybe I was imagining it. Shapes seemed to stretch, angles shifting, shadows creeping across surfaces that should have been smooth. My pulse raced. The darkness around me was alive, aware, feeding off my fear. Every sound I made, every breath, every tremor of hesitation, it noticed. It waited, patient, calculating. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn and sprint down the hall, but my legs felt leaden, heavy, unresponsive. Fear locked them in place, and I could feel it deep in my bones, something ancient and methodical, anchoring me to the spot. And then I heard it. A low rasp, like breath through a throat not meant for breathing, moving somewhere behind me. Slow, deliberate, too close. I spun, flashlight shaking in my hands. The beam caught nothing. Nothing but darkness, folding in on itself, swallowing the light, turning it useless. My chest tightened, lungs burning as I gasped for air. The sound of it breathing surrounded me now, no longer behind, no longer distant. In front, to the side, everywhere. And I realized with a sinking feeling that it had always been there. It had never moved. I had moved. The darkness pressed closer, and with it came the sensation of 1,000 unseen eyes, staring, judging, learning. I could feel them in my skull, probing, touching thoughts I didn't even know I had. Panic clawed at me, but I couldn't flee. My limbs refused. My heart thundered. I could hear the whispering again, words I didn't understand, but understood all the same. Warnings, threats, secrets not meant to be known. I stumbled, trying to find a door, an exit, anything real. The walls shifted as I moved, angles stretching impossibly, shadows dancing in ways that should have defied physics. My mind screamed that it was impossible, and yet it happened, every step confirming that the building itself was no longer bound by the rules I understood. And the eyes, always watching, always present, always patient. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to ground myself, to find something solid, something unchanging. My fingers brushed against the edge of a doorway, familiar somehow, and I leaned against it, desperate for reality. My flashlight flickered one last time, and in that brief illumination, I thought I saw faces. Hundreds of them. Pressed into the walls, twisted, featureless, screaming silently. And then the light died completely. Pure darkness swallowed me. No flashlight, no overhead lights, nothing. Just the weight of it, the suffocating presence, the feeling of being unmade, unraveled, exposed. My breath came in shallow gasps. My eyes strained, futile, trying to see, to make sense, to find something solid. But there was nothing. Only the sensation of being watched. Always watched, and then I felt it. A presence directly behind me, close enough that my skin tingled, my hair rose. It exhaled. Or maybe it was me exhaling. But the pressure of its awareness pushed into me, filling my chest, my skull, my mind. Fear became a physical thing, a living entity pressing down, coiling around my spine, demanding attention. I tried to speak, tried to scream, but my voice caught, swallowed by the dark. I moved. I had to move. Forward, backward, anything. But the hall seemed endless now, stretching infinitely in every direction. Shadows pressed against my mind, coiling around my memories, dredging up fear I had buried long ago. I remembered being a kid, alone in a dark room, hearing something breathe in the corners. The memory hit like a knife, sharp, familiar. And I realized that fear never leaves you. It waits, patient, until the right darkness The right silence calls it back to life. My flashlight flickered weakly in my hand. I snapped it on, desperate for the beam to pierce the void to give me control. But the light revealed nothing, just the endless black, folding, shifting, hiding something I could feel more than see. And in that emptiness, I understood. It wasn't hiding from me. It didn't need to. I was already inside its awareness, already being watched, already known. I backed against the wall, sliding down until I was sitting, knees to my chest, shaking. The darkness surrounded me completely, filling every corner of the hallway, pressing into me. The eyes were there, even if I couldn't see them. I could feel them, and I knew that no amount of light, no amount of reason, no amount of willpower would make them disappear. I whispered into the dark, my voice trembling. "Go away," the silence answered. Not empty, not peaceful, but waiting, patient, endless. And I knew then, with a certainty that chilled me deeper than any shadow, that some things don't want to be chased. Some things only want to watch, and I had stumbled right into their gaze. I shouldn't have been here. I knew it the second I pushed open the heavy door of the old patrol station. The hinges groaned like a warning, and the smell hit me first. Dust, mold, and the faint tang of something older, something metallic. My boots crunched against decades of grime as I stepped inside. The air was thick, heavy, like it had been trapped for years, waiting for someone stupid enough to disturb it. The station had been abandoned for as long as anyone could remember. Windows cracked and clouded, blinds hanging in tatters, and the walls yellowed with age. But it was the desk that caught me. A single, lonely thing in the center of the room, buried under a mountain of dust, with a single chair pulled slightly out like someone had left in a hurry and never returned. I ran my fingers across the surface. Thick layers of dust rose into the air, catching in the weak shafts of light from the broken windows. And there it was, tucked in the corner, a tattered logbook, bound in cracked leather, pages yellowed and curling. I don't know why I reached for it. Maybe curiosity. Maybe something darker. Something pulling me closer without my permission. The first page was simple. Dates, patrol routes, names, normal, mundane entries. Check the West Alley. Nothing unusual. All clear. Midnight call, false alarm. Weather cold. Easy to read. Almost comforting in its normality. I flipped a few pages, the edges brittle under my fingers. But then I noticed it. The entries began to shift. Words that seemed ordinary at first started to feel wrong. The tone changed. Subtle at first. A sense of unease creeping between the lines. Found shadows moving against the walls. Couldn't tell if it was my eyes or the alley. Felt wrong. Skipped patrol for a minute. I frowned, leaning closer. Shadows? Skipped patrol? That wasn't something a cop would normally write. Not in a log meant for reports. I flipped again. The entries got stranger, almost frantic. Voices outside my window, whispering. Weather normal. Nothing to report. I paused. Whispering? Outside a patrol station in the middle of the night? My hands trembled slightly as I turned the page. The handwriting had changed, too. Hasty, jagged, almost scrawled. I could feel the writer's unease bleeding through the ink, through the paper. Third night. Can't shake the feeling they're watching. The street lamps flicker, shadows stretch too long. Heart racing, eyes at the window. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. I swallowed hard. My skin prickled. This was no ordinary log. It was a record of fear. Real fear. I imagined the officer sitting there alone in the dark, writing with a shaking hand, listening to the world for something that wasn't there. Or maybe something that was. The thought made my chest tighten. I flipped another page. The words were worse now. Deliberately chaotic, sentences breaking off mid-thought. I saw them. Not human. Standing by the alley. Watching. I blinked. Gone. The lights. Always flicker. Can't trust the walls. They breathe. Wait. I leaned back, heart thumping. I didn't know if I should keep reading. If my curiosity would reward me or destroy me. But I couldn't stop. I had to know what had driven this officer to write like this. My fingers itched, my pulse quickened, but I turned the page. Last night, they followed me inside. The station isn't empty. I can hear them moving in the walls, whispering through the vents. I don't know how long I can hold it together. Don't move. Don't look. They're patient. I froze. I could almost hear the words, almost feel the unease that radiated from the paper. My flashlight flickered, weak and sputtering, as if the station itself disapproved of me reading these pages. I leaned closer, squinting at the text, the words crawling under my skin. The handwriting now looked desperate, almost alive, curling and shifting slightly on the page, as if it wanted to escape. Someone will read this. Someone has to. They will know. They wait outside. They breathe. The light's gone. Don't leave the desk. Never leave the desk. I swallowed hard, trying to shake the chill that had settled over my shoulders. It wasn't just the words. It was the feeling behind them, a suffocating weight pressing down, heavy, oppressive, like I wasn't supposed to be here. I ran my hand over the desk again, trying to ground myself. Dust fell in motes, shimmering in the weak light, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement in the corner of my eye, shadows shifting, too fast to be natural. I blinked. Nothing. Just the room, empty, silent, except for the hum of the old fluorescent lights struggling to stay alive. I could feel it, though. Something beyond the paper, beyond the desk, watching me, waiting. Something that had been patient for years, recording every word, every heartbeat, every flicker of fear. I forced myself to continue. The next entries were more fragmented, more panicked. The air thick. The walls. Breathing. I hear them in the corners, moving through the vents. Always there, watching. Don't breathe too loud. Don't blink. Don't look away. Shadows stretch, fold, change. They learn. They wait. I felt my own breath catch. Shadows stretch. They learn. The words echoed in my mind. I could almost feel eyes pressing against me, unseen, measuring, assessing. My stomach churned. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't. I had to know what had happened. Had to understand what had driven the officer to this state. Lights flicker. Shadows follow. I thought I saw someone in the hallway. Not real, not human. Heart pounding. Don't move. They are patient. I am not safe, I shivered. The air in the room felt colder, heavier. I could hear faint creaks in the floorboards, almost like footsteps, though I knew I was alone. And yet, the station didn't feel empty. Never empty. Not really. I flipped the page faster now, heart hammering, fingers trembling. Last entry. Don't read further. Don't look behind. They will be here if you do. The desk holds the record. They wait, always waiting. I don't know how long I can stay. I don't know if anyone will come. But the log must exist. Must be found. Beware the desk. Beware the log. Shadows breathe. They watch. The page ended abruptly. Torn, jagged edges like the officer had been ripped away mid-thought. I stared at it for a long moment, my hands gripping the edges, heart racing. I could feel the weight of it all pressing on me. The fear, the waiting, the silence that was too loud. I looked around the room, suddenly aware of every shadow, every corner, every flicker of light. My flashlight stuttered, weak and failing. Dust swirled in the shafts of light, and I imagined shapes moving just beyond perception, stretching, folding, waiting. I told myself it was imagination, that the log had simply recorded paranoia, that the years of abandonment had done this to my mind. But I couldn't shake it. The feeling of eyes, watching, waiting. I closed the logbook slowly, almost reverently, and brushed the dust from my hands. My pulse was frantic, my chest tight. I told myself I would leave, go back to the world of reason and light. But even as I stepped back, I could feel the station pressing in, whispering in ways I couldn't hear. The desk! The log! It wasn't just paper and wood. It was a record, a warning, a doorway to something that existed in the space between words, between shadows, between fear and reality. I left the station quickly, the logbook still in the desk. I didn't take it. I couldn't. Something told me that taking it would be a mistake. The desk kept it, protected it, waiting for the next person foolish enough to disturb it. And I knew I would never forget it. Every word, every sentence, every desperate plea burned into my mind. Shadows breathe. They watch, always waiting. Outside, the night was quiet, too quiet. The streets empty, the air cold but not oppressive. Yet I could feel it in me, lingering, the station following me in some intangible way. I knew I would dream of it. I knew the shadows, the breathing, the waiting, would visit me in sleep, in dark corners, in reflections that weren't quite right. And I knew that one day, someone else would find that desk. Someone else would read the log, and the shadows would wait for them, just as patient, just as hungry, just as inevitable. I came back the next night. I knew I shouldn't have. I told myself it was curiosity, but the truth was more desperate than that. The patrol station had lingered in my mind all day, its shadows, its dust, that logbook calling in some quiet, insistent way. I pushed open the door, and it groaned the same warning as before, as if the building remembered me. The smell hit me again, stale, metallic, waiting. My boots crunched over the scattered debris as I moved toward the desk. The logbook was still there, untouched. Or at least I thought so. My hand hovered over it, and I noticed the edges of the latest pages were slightly curled, like someone had just turned them. My pulse spiked. I hadn't left it open this way, hadn't touched it since I had been here yesterday. And yet here it was, the next pages waiting, as if the logbook had been writing itself while I slept. I sat down slowly, hands trembling, and opened it. The entries were different, not just in content, but in handwriting. It wasn't mine, not that I had ever written in it. The letters were precise, jagged, irregular, with strokes that curved in ways a normal human hand shouldn't manage. I swallowed. Every nerve in me screamed that I should close the book and leave. But I couldn't. I had to read. I needed to know what had written itself while I wasn't here. The first entry caught my eye immediately. Date stamped yesterday. They are here. Watching. Waiting. Don't turn around. My heart skipped. Yesterday? I hadn't written this. I had barely left the station yesterday without disturbing the book. The words felt alive on the page, pulsing slightly, like they were aware I was reading them. I leaned closer, brushing a finger over the ink. It was dry, crisp, as if it had been written in haste, but no human hand had made it. Not mine, I could feel it. The next entry was longer, almost a paragraph. The shadows move on their own, stretching too long, folding where corners shouldn't exist. I hear whispers through the walls, voices that do not belong. I am alone. I am not alone. I froze. Whispers through the walls. Alone, but not alone. My pulse raced. I could hear my own breathing, loud, uneven, yet I imagined something else breathing just beyond perception. My hand shook as I turned the page. The handwriting changed slightly again. Looser, more frantic, almost desperate, but undeniably not mine. They follow my steps. The lights flicker to their rhythm. I cannot look away, cannot move too fast. Or they notice. Patient. Waiting. Always patient. I cannot leave the desk. I must record it. They demand it. I swallowed hard. Demand, not observation, not curiosity. Demand. It was a word that made the hairs on my arms rise. The ink seemed darker here, almost black, thick with weight, as if it had soaked some part of the air along with the page. I traced the letters with my finger and recoiled. The edges of the page seemed colder than they should have been, almost sharp. I told myself it was imagination, but my mind refused the excuse. I flipped another page. This one was even worse. The handwriting now slanted in impossible ways. Letters stretching taller than they should, dipping lower than possible. Words bent across the lines, curving as if the page itself had been stretched by invisible fingers. And the content, my stomach lurched. They are in the corners. Not all corners, not yet, but some. Watching. Waiting. I blinked. They were gone. I blinked again. They were closer. Not human. Not human. Not human. My breath caught. Not human. My flashlight flickered weakly in my hand, casting dancing shadows across the walls, long and stretched. I could almost feel them there, waiting for me to blink, waiting for me to pause, waiting for me to acknowledge them. My hands trembled. I forced myself to turn the page. The door creaked. I did not open it. I do not open it, but I hear movement. Breathing through the vent, footsteps where no one can walk. The desk holds the record. I must write. They demand it. Patient, patient, patient. I swallowed hard. The repetition, the insistence, it was deliberate. I felt a presence pressing just beyond the edge of my perception, a weight that settled in my chest and throat. I told myself it was the old building, settling, old wiring, imagination. But the pull toward the next page was undeniable, irresistible. I had to know what came next. I flipped and stopped. My pulse went into overdrive. The next entry was smeared slightly, as if the page had been touched with a damp hand I could not see. And the handwriting, it was my own. Almost exactly, but not. Slight differences in the slant, the spacing, the pressure of the pen. My own handwriting, but not. I see them now. Closer. Breathing. I cannot move. They are patient. I blinked and they were gone. I blinked again. I see them in the corners of my vision. Always watching, patient, waiting, always waiting. I dropped the book. My hands flew to my face. I could feel sweat running down my back, my chest tight, stomach churning. The station was silent, empty, and yet not. I could feel eyes unseen pressing from the shadows, measuring, studying, learning. Something had written these words while I wasn't here. Something had used my hand to do it, or at least my mind. I looked at the logbook again. The pages turned themselves slightly, curling as if breathing. The ink pulsed faintly, just enough to make me think the words were alive. My stomach lurched. I told myself it was just dust in the air, a trick of the light. But I knew it wasn't. I knew what I was seeing was something else. Something patient, deliberate, waiting for someone to read. Waiting for me. I forced myself to continue. Each page was more frantic, more chaotic. Letters spilling across lines, words repeated, sentences breaking off mid-thought. They move. They breathe. They are patient. Always patient. I cannot leave. The desk holds the record. I cannot leave. They wait. My pulse was frantic. My hand shook as I traced the letters, reading each one, trying to understand what had happened here, what had changed overnight. The station felt alive now, every corner filled with possibility, every shadow pressing in. I felt my own heartbeat echo in the still air. The weight of something unseen pressed down, heavy, relentless. The walls, breathing. Shadows fold. They follow me. I cannot leave. They demand the record, patient, waiting. I am not safe. I cannot leave. I will not leave. I must record it. I leaned back from the desk. My hands were trembling violently, sweat slicking my palms. I could feel something in the room with me, something unseen but certain. It pressed closer when I moved, waited when I paused, measured my fear and my hesitation. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow shift across the corner of the room, stretching impossibly, reaching toward me, bending angles that should not exist. I looked back at the logbook. My hands went cold. New pages had appeared. I hadn't opened them. I hadn't turned the page. But they were there, fresh, waiting. And the handwriting was not mine again. Sharp, deliberate, terrifyingly human, and yet not. Words scrawled in urgency, panic, and deliberate intent. They are closer tonight. I hear them in the walls. The floorboards creak where no one walks. They are patient, always patient. I cannot leave. The desk demands it. The record must continue. They are not human. Not human. Not human. I could feel it now, heavy in the room, a presence pressing against the back of my neck, against my shoulders, filling my chest with leaden weight. I wanted to scream, to run, to destroy the book, but my body refused. I was anchored to the desk, to the log, to the words that insisted on being read. My eyes flicked over the pages, each one more chaotic than the last, handwriting shifting, changing, alive. Do not leave. They watch. They wait, patient, always patient. I see them in the corners. I feel them in the walls. The lights flicker. The shadows fold. I cannot leave. I must record. They demand it. Always waiting. I leaned back, shivering, hands slick with sweat, chest heaving. The logbook lay before me, alive in its stillness, its words pressing into my mind. I knew I shouldn't be here. I knew I should leave, run, never return. And yet I could feel the pull, the undeniable, irresistible insistence. The words called to me, patient, deliberate, hungry. I closed the book slowly, almost reverently. My fingers shook, my pulse hammering in my ears. The station was silent again, empty in a way that felt unnatural, as if it were holding its breath. I left the desk, left the room, and told myself I would never return. But I knew the logbook would be there, waiting, patient, ready for the next person to read it, to feed it, to record what it demanded. Even now I can feel it. The handwriting changes, the words alive in my mind, folding over my thoughts. I can hear them when I close my eyes, see the shapes shifting in the corners of my vision. The desk waits. The log waits. They are patient. always patient. And I know one day someone else will sit here and the log will demand its record again. I didn't want to come back. I told myself that over and over on the walk to the station. Every rational part of me screamed that it was a mistake. That logbook wasn't meant for me. But the pull was relentless, tugging at my thoughts, filling every quiet moment of my day. The memory of the handwriting changing on its own haunted me, the words alive in the pages. I felt like I was being drawn toward something older than the building itself. Something patient, watching, waiting. The station smelled the same as before. Dust, rust, and the faint metallic tang that made my stomach twist. I hesitated at the doorway, hand on the handle. The darkened room seemed to breathe, walls pulsing faintly, or maybe it was my imagination. My boots crunched over the debris as I stepped inside, and my flashlight cut a weak path through the gloom. The desk was waiting, just as it had been, the logbook perched in the middle like it had been expecting me. My hands trembled as I approached. I felt a weight in the air, thick and oppressive, like the building itself had grown conscious in my absence. I reached for the book and my fingers grazed the cover. It was colder than it had any right to be, leather stiff and unyielding. I opened it slowly, almost holding my breath. The pages had changed again. Not just the handwriting, though that was still jagged, shifting, alive. The content had changed. The words screamed at me in a way I couldn't quite describe. It wasn't just what they said, it was how they said it. A vibration that seemed to echo through the room, vibrating against my chest. I blinked, and I swear I could hear the faintest echo of voices, muffled, almost imperceptible at first. The first new entry was short, simple. But every letter seemed to vibrate with urgency. Do not ignore. They listen. They wait. I shivered. Something inside me clenched, a visceral warning I couldn't ignore. I flipped the page. The voices grew louder, like they were rising from the ink itself. Not words I could understand, but screams. Muffled, desperate, writhing behind the text. I felt a weight settle on my chest, my breath catching. The building was silent, but I could hear them. Former officers, maybe, trapped in the pages, trapped in the ink, screaming warnings I couldn't ignore. The next entry was longer. The handwriting shifted mid-page, jagged and looping, almost frantic. I was alone. I thought I was alone. They are in the corners, the walls, the vents. I hear footsteps when there is no one. I blinked and they were closer. The air breathes. The desk records. They demand it. I am not safe. I could feel my hands trembling as I read. The words pressed into my mind like a weight, a living presence that clawed at the edges of reason. And the screams, they were louder now, pressed against the back of my skull, pulsing with the rhythm of the sentences. I had to keep reading, though every instinct told me to drop the book and run. They watch through the walls. The shadows fold. The lights flicker. I cannot leave. I do not leave. The desk holds the record. Patient, always patient. I am not safe. They will be here, waiting. I swallowed, my throat dry, my pulse hammering. I could feel it then, the presence. Not in the room itself, not fully, but in the space between the words, the cracks of the pages, the scratches of the pen, something that had waited patient for me to read it. And now that I had, it was aware of me. Every tremor of fear, every hesitant glance over my shoulder, every shallow breath registered, feeding it, learning me. I turned the next page, and the screams became unmistakable. I could hear them clearly now, muffled but desperate. Officers, I think, trapped somewhere between the lines, leaving warnings that didn't reach the world, only reaching those foolish enough to read them. The handwriting was jagged, looping in ways that made my eyes ache. Words bent over each other, overlapping. Do not leave. They watch. Always patient, patient, patient. Shadows move where no shadows should be. The desk demands it. The record must continue. I felt a cold sweat run down my spine. My hands shook violently. I wanted to close the book, throw it across the room, anything to escape the whispers of the trapped voices. But my curiosity, my fear, my insistence to understand it all kept me glued to the pages. Every line, every letter, every curve of the ink felt alive. And the voices? They weren't just in the book anymore. They were in my mind, echoing, pressing, insistent. They breathe with the walls. They fold in the corners. I hear them moving through the vents. I blinked and they were gone. I blinked again. They were closer. Not human, not human, not human. Patient, always patient. I cannot leave. The desk watches. I must record. I swallowed hard, breath trembling. The sentences pressed against me, not just with meaning, but with a presence, as if the ink itself wanted to crawl into my mind. I could hear the faint scrape of footsteps that weren't mine. My flashlight flickered weakly, throwing shadows that danced just beyond recognition. I could feel eyes on me, not just from the room, but from the pages themselves. Watching, waiting, patient. I flipped the page again, and the screams became unbearable. Not just faint echoes now, but full-throated, desperate, a cacophony of fear and warning. The handwriting twisted and stretched, letters bending over one another, as if the page itself was writhing. They are here, always, watching, recording. I cannot leave. I cannot leave. Patient, patient. Shadows breathe. Do not blink. Do not look away. They demand the record. The log must continue. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to block it out. But I could hear them, feel them. Every desperate scream, every frenzied warning pressing against the back of my skull. The desk seemed to pulse beneath my hands, heavy, alive, demanding attention. I wanted to run, to escape, but the book had me anchored. It refused to be ignored. Another page, another wave of screams, another warning. The handwriting shifted again, almost fluid now, looping impossibly, letters overlapping, crossing the lines. They move with the shadows. The walls breathe. I blinked and they were closer. I cannot leave. The desk demands it. The log records, patient, patient, always patient. Do not read. Do not read. Do not leave. I trembled violently, my chest tight. The voices pressed harder now, filling the room, filling my mind. I could hear breathing, not my own, not human, shallow and deliberate. Shadows flickered in the corners of my vision. Every instinct screamed at me to close the book, to leave, to destroy it. But I couldn't. I had to know. I had to understand what had happened to the officers before me. They whisper in the vents. They move in the floorboards. They are patient, always patient. The desk holds the record. I cannot leave. I must write. They will be here. They wait. I hear them. I see them. Not human, not human, not human. Patient, always patient. Shadows fold. They breathe. My breathing grew shallow. My flashlight flickered, barely holding a weak beam. I could feel the room press in on me, walls stretching, angles bending in ways that shouldn't exist. And yet the book was the center of it all. The log, alive and demanding, a conduit for something older than me, older than the building, older than reason. I flipped the page one last time, and I could hear the screams clearly, unmistakable. Officers, perhaps, trapped forever between the lines, leaving messages that weren't meant for the living. The handwriting was chaotic, almost frantic, curling over the edges of the page, overlapping itself. They will be here. They wait. They watch, always patient. Do not leave. Do not look away. Do not breathe too loud. Shadows breathe. The desk demands it. The log continues. Patient, patient, always patient. I pressed my hands to my head, trying to hold back the ringing in my ears, the screaming in my mind. My heart pounded, chest tight, sweat running down my back. The logbook was alive. It wasn't paper and ink anymore. It was a record, a prison, a warning, and it knew I was here. It knew I was reading. It knew I would remember. I closed the book slowly, almost reverently. My hands shook, fingers sticky with sweat. The room felt empty again, silent. But I knew better. The voices, the shadows, the patient waiting, it hadn't gone. Not really. It was in the book, in the desk, in the space between the pages. Always waiting, always patient. And one day it would call to someone else, and the screams would rise again, desperate, echoing through the lines, demanding attention, demanding the record continue. I left the station with the logbook closed, but it followed me in my mind. I could see the pages turning in my dreams, hear the desperate screams, feel the patient presence pressing at my thoughts, and I knew with the certainty of fear itself that it would wait, always, patient, waiting for the next person foolish enough to read between the pages. I shouldn't have come back. I knew that the second my boots crunched over the broken tiles outside the station, my body wanted to run, to turn around and never look back, but something deeper, older, pulled me forward. The air was thick, damp and metallic, and it clung to my skin the moment I stepped inside. The station smelled the same as it always had: dust, decay, and something sharper, almost acidic, lurking beneath. The desk was waiting. The logbook sat in the center, its leather cover cracked and darkened with age, almost breathing beneath my hands. I felt it before I touched it, a low, insistent hum pressing at the base of my skull. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was fear and adrenaline playing tricks. But I knew better. I knew that when I opened this book tonight, nothing would be the same. I sat down slowly, my hands shaking despite my best efforts to steady them. The book opened easily, like it had been waiting for me, pages curling faintly in welcome or warning. The handwriting on the latest pages was jagged, irregular, almost frantic, familiar yet alien, the echoes of officers long gone trapped in the ink. I braced myself and began to read. The first few entries were like those before. Warnings, descriptions of shadows, whispers through the vents, lights flickering against impossible angles. I skimmed them quickly, barely able to breathe, until I reached the last entry. My breath caught in my throat. There it was. My name not written by me, not in my handwriting, just printed in the same jagged scrawl I had seen before, deliberate and dark. Beneath it, a blank date, no timestamp, no explanation, just my name staring up at me like a warning, a target, a sentence. I froze. My chest tightened, lungs constricting around air I couldn't draw in. I read it again, slowly, carefully, as if the act of seeing it multiple times might make it disappear. It didn't. My name glared up at me from the page, stark and unyielding, the black ink vivid against the yellowed paper. My stomach dropped. My pulse thundered in my ears. My name shouldn't have been here. It couldn't have been. The last time I had touched this book, it wasn't. And yet here it was, impossible and undeniable. The room felt smaller suddenly, heavier. Shadows pressed into the corners, stretching, folding where they shouldn't. The faint hum that had been nothing more than a whisper of fear now became a low, insistent vibration thrumming against my chest. Something was here. Something was aware of me, waiting, patient. I swallowed hard, trying to calm myself, telling myself it was just paranoia, that the logbook was an old book, that I was reading too much into it. But the instinct in my chest, deep and primal, screamed at me that this was no accident. The pages were alive, and now somehow they had recognized me, called me out, marked me. I flipped the page slowly, almost afraid of what would appear next. The handwriting shifted mid-page, jagged and looping, letters curling into themselves in impossible ways. "They have arrived," it said. "The record demands it. Patient, always patient. Do not leave. Do not look away. The desk watches." I pressed a hand to the desk, feeling the vibration through the wood. It wasn't just the book anymore. The desk was part of it, alive in its own right, a vessel for something older than me, older than any rational explanation. I could hear it in my bones, the faintest scraping, as if fingers I could not see traced lines in the air, shaping shadows, feeding fear into the room. The next entry was worse. The handwriting became fluid, impossible, letters stretching across the lines, overlapping each other, forming almost a pattern. I read aloud, voice shaking despite my effort to whisper, "My name appears here. They know. Patient. Always patient. I cannot leave. The desk records my presence. The shadows fold. The walls breathe. They are in the corners." I blinked. They were gone. I blinked again. They were closer. I stopped reading. My throat was raw, my chest tight. I could feel eyes, not human eyes, on me, pressing from the shadows, measuring me, waiting for me to make a wrong move. My flashlight trembled in my hand, its weak beam dancing across the peeling walls, over cracked windows, over shadows that should have stayed still. I tried to convince myself it was a trick, that it was fear writing itself into my mind, that the logbook had no power over me. But deep down I knew better. I could feel the presence. Patient, deliberate, waiting. The desk pulsed faintly beneath my hands, and my name burned into my skull like fire, echoing through every nerve ending. The next page made me want to throw the book across the room. I couldn't stop myself from reading. The handwriting was chaotic, desperate, almost alive. The words clawed into my mind, pressing, shaping, bending perception. They wait. They always wait. The desk knows your name. The log demands your record. Patient. Always patient. The shadows fold. Do not blink. Do not look away. You are recorded. You cannot leave. They will be here. I pressed my face into my hands, trying to block it out. But the whispers were there now, faint but persistent. Voices of officers long gone, trapped in ink, screaming warnings I could not ignore. Every instinct in me told me to run, to throw the book away, to tear the pages, anything to break the spell. But the logbook would not allow it. It anchored me to the desk, to the words, to the presence that waited silently behind my fear. I opened the next page. My name appeared again, larger this time, written as though it had been stamped into the paper with black fire. The blank date beneath it was heavier now, like an accusation. My pulse skyrocketed. I couldn't breathe. The shadows in the corners shifted again, stretching impossibly, folding into each other, as if the room itself was alive and aware. "They have come for you," the next entry read, in handwriting jagged and looping, dripping with urgency. "Do not leave. Do not move. The desk records your fear. The log demands it. Patient, always patient. The corners breathe. The walls watch. You are not alone. You never were. Blink and they are closer. Patient, always patient." I dropped the flashlight. The weak beam flickered out, leaving me in darkness. I could feel it then, fully. The presence, patient and immense, pressing against the back of my neck, against my shoulders, folding the air around me. My breath came in shallow gasps. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped. The room itself seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat, walls stretching, shadows bending, corners folding into each other. The desk beneath me trembled faintly, alive in a way that no furniture should ever be. And my name? My name was written there on the page, inked in finality. Blank date beneath it like a countdown I couldn't read, couldn't understand. But somehow I knew it had begun. I flipped another page, and there, in handwriting I did not recognize, chaotic and curling, was a single line repeated over and over. "They are patient. They wait. They watch. Your name is theirs now. You cannot leave. The desk records. The shadows fold. Patient. Always patient." My head reeled. My hands shook violently as I gripped the book. The whispering became louder now, indistinct but terrifying. Voices overlapping, screaming, warning, crying, all at once. I could hear the air move as if something were breathing against my skin. Just behind me, all around me. I could feel shapes pressing in from the corners, from the ceiling, from the floor, bending light and shadow in ways that made my stomach turn. I wanted to close the book. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run. But I couldn't. My hands were glued to the pages. My eyes locked on my name, the blank date beneath it, and the terrifying certainty that it had chosen me, marked me, claimed me. The next entry appeared almost immediately as I read. The handwriting was my own, almost exactly, but wrong, subtle differences in every letter. "I am here. They know me. I cannot leave. Patient, always patient. The desk records. The shadows fold." I blinked. "They are closer." I blinked again. "I cannot escape." I could feel the book moving beneath my hands, as if it were breathing. The shadows stretched further, folding in impossible angles, pressing against the edges of my vision. I tried to close the logbook. My fingers wouldn't obey. The desk held me. The book held me. My name burned into the pages, blank date beneath it like an executioner's mark. And then, the whispers stopped. Silence pressed in so tightly I could feel it in my chest. The absence of sound was heavier than any scream. My name stared back at me from the page. Blank date beneath it. Patient, waiting, alive. I could feel it pulsing against my skull. A slow, deliberate rhythm counting down, measuring, observing. I left the station that night. The logbook closed, but still pulsing in my mind. The shadows followed me, lingering in every corner of my vision, pressing at the edges of reality. My name repeated over and over in my head, blank date beneath it, and the certainty that I had become part of the record. I knew I would never be free. The desk, the log, the shadows, they had claimed me. Patient, always patient. And one day someone else would sit here, and my name would still be there. Waiting, blank date beneath it, a warning, a mark, a record of the moment I became part of the history the log demanded. I had been on the night shift for over 6 years, and I thought I had heard every kind of call a dispatcher could throw at me. Drunks, lost hikers, screaming neighbors. Those were the bread and butter of midnight. Routine, predictable, safe, until tonight. It started with the phone. The kind of ring that feels wrong even before you answer it. Long, slow, deliberate. Not urgent, not casual, just wrong. My hand hovered for a moment, the fluorescent light above the station flickering as if to warn me, and then I picked it up. "Dispatch, what's your situation?" I said, my voice already tired. There was silence. Then a voice, low and metallic, yet oddly familiar. "Officer." "Are you alone?" I froze. That question should have sounded routine, but it wasn't asked like any human would ask it. There was no warmth, no hesitation. No hesitation in the way a human fumbles for words. It was precise, too calculated, as if someone had scanned my thoughts and knew the answer before I spoke. "Yes," I said cautiously. "I'm alone in the station." "Who's calling?" Another silence. And then the voice came again. "I see you." The hairs on the back of my neck rose. I stared at the empty station, the rows of chairs, the peeling linoleum, the flickering fluorescent lights. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. My chest tightened. "Dispatch?" "This is Officer. Hello?" My own voice sounded wrong. Fragile. "You can't hang up," the voice said, this time with a hint of amusement, like it had been waiting for me to try. "Not yet. I need you." I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to shake the panic. Maybe it was a prank. Kids with too much free time. Some glitch in the system. The thought didn't comfort me. Deep down, I knew this was something else. Something old. "Something patient? I don't understand. Who are you?" I whispered more to myself than to the phone. There was a soft chuckle, like metal scraping against metal. "I've been listening. Always. You think no one notices the quiet ones, the night watchers, the lonely? But I notice, and now I need you to listen." I leaned back in my chair, hands shaking slightly. The dim light made the shadows in the room stretch unnaturally, like they were watching me, creeping closer with every tick of the clock. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice brittle. "To deliver a message," it said. "A dispatch that should never have left the airwaves. And only you can carry it." I laughed nervously, trying to regain some sense of control. "There's no such thing as a dispatch like that. I've been here for years." "You'll know it when you hear it," the voice said, "and by then it will be too late to look away." A cold wind brushed the back of my neck, though the station's windows were closed. My stomach turned. My instincts screamed at me to hang up, to run, to do anything but stay. But something, I don't know if it was curiosity or fear, kept me frozen, held to the line like a moth caught in a spider's web. "Tell me, where are you?" I asked, my own words sounding small, like they belonged to someone else. "I'm everywhere," it said. "I've been here before, on other nights and other stations. Do you remember the call from 2 nights ago? The one that never logged in the system?" I swallowed hard. 2 nights ago there had been a call. A missing girl. Her name had never appeared in any official reports. I had dismissed it, assuming someone misdialed. But now the memory burned in my chest. I hadn't forgotten. How could I? Something had screamed down the line. A voice, not human. "Not right, I remember," I said, voice barely audible. "Good," the voice said. "You're ready." I gripped the receiver so tightly that my knuckles went white. "Ready for what?" "To hear what was never meant to be heard." The lights flickered again, harder this time, and the walls seemed to shiver. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing in from every corner of the room. And then, faintly at first, a whisper started through the phone. I strained to hear it. It was the dispatcher's voice, or what I thought a dispatcher should sound like. Calm, steady, professional. Except it wasn't her. It was wrong, hollow, layered with something beneath it, something ancient, something that shouldn't speak through a radio, through a phone line, Something that had been waiting in the gaps. Officer, they are coming. They are always coming. Do not look behind you. Do not move the chairs. Do not answer when they knock. If you do, you will see what waits beyond the frequencies. My heart pounded. My pulse rattled in my ears like a second heartbeat. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, but I couldn't. I couldn't stop listening. They are drawn to the quiet, to the watchers, the ones who stay while the world sleeps. You will hear them tonight. You will hear them because I have called them. And now, you must listen. I stumbled out of my chair, pacing the empty room. My shadow danced against the walls, grotesque and twitching. The clock ticked, slow, deliberate. I could hear my own breathing, ragged, desperate. Who are they? I whispered. Not who, the voice corrected me. What? And they remember. A sudden, sharp knock echoed from the door of the station. My stomach dropped. I froze, staring at the unyielding metal. Another knock, softer this time, but closer. Closer to where I stood. Who is there? My voice cracked. The phone went silent. I held it to my ear, every instinct screaming at me to run. The silence stretched. Then a whisper. So close I could feel it curling around my neck. They are here. And then the line went dead. I stared at the phone, the receiver trembling in my hand. The station was silent again. Too silent. The hum of the fluorescent lights felt like it was holding its breath. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't move. I couldn't stop listening for what might come next. Minutes or hours passed. I couldn't tell. The world had shrunk to the small square of light around me. Every shadow seemed to flicker, every sound amplified in a way that made my teeth ache. And then faintly a sound over the radio. Just a whisper. A dispatch, my name, a location, directions I didn't recognize. But the tone was wrong. I couldn't make out the words, but the intent was clear. I wasn't being guided. I was being drawn, pulled toward something that had been waiting in the silence between calls, in the gaps of the world where no one dared to look. I gripped the phone tighter, shaking, whispering to myself that it was just a prank, that it was just the long night, that it wasn't real. But deep down, in the marrow of my bones, I knew the truth. It was real. It was listening, watching, waiting, and it had chosen me. I don't know how long I sat there after the call ended, the receiver dangling from my hand. I don't know how many times I told myself I was imagining it, that no dispatcher should exist like that no voice should slip between the cracks of the world and into your skull. But I could still hear it, faintly, in the hum of the fluorescent lights, in the shadows creeping along the walls, in the dead silence of a station that should have been empty. I know it's coming back. I know it always comes back. Because the voice said so. Because midnight always listens. Because some calls are never meant to be hung up. The line had gone dead, but the silence didn't last. I didn't pick up the phone again immediately. My hands were still trembling, and the shadows seemed to breathe around me, twisting against the walls in slow, deliberate movements. I kept telling myself it had been a fluke, a glitch, a trick of exhaustion. I wanted to believe it, but I couldn't. That voice had found me. It had marked me, and tonight, it was back. The phone rang again, softer this time, like it was sighing through the receiver. I stared at it, my chest tight, my stomach knotting. I knew I shouldn't answer. I knew it. Every instinct screamed to throw it across the room, to run out into the empty streets where the night was at least predictable. But something inside me, the part that had always stayed on the night shift, the part that listened when no one else would, forced my hand. I lifted the receiver. "Officer," the voice said, calm, almost clinical. "Do you remember the last instructions I gave?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Yes, I remember." "Good. Then you know that disobedience is dangerous. And you alone are the only one who can follow these orders. Are you ready?" I wanted to laugh, to tell the voice that I wasn't ready for anything, but it wasn't that kind of question. There was no room for refusal, just listening, following, being drawn deeper. "I'm listening," I said, my voice cracking slightly. The instructions started simple. At first it was mundane things, almost believable. Take the police cruiser and drive to the corner of 5th and Harper. There is a streetlight flickering. Under it, you will find a note. Read it aloud into your radio, word for word. My fingers twitched around the receiver. It felt impossible already. Notes don't just appear under streetlights. But the voice was patient, insistent, unyielding. I don't understand why, I said. You don't need to understand, it replied. You only need to obey. The consequences of hesitation are unpleasant. I didn't ask what those consequences were. I didn't need to. The memory of the last call, the one that shouldn't have existed, the one that still whispered in the shadows of the station, was enough. The air had a weight, a pressure I could feel in my chest and behind my eyes. I left the station, the keys cold in my hand, the night wrapping around me like a living thing. The city was quiet, almost too quiet, and the streetlights flickered lazily, casting long, sickly shadows that reached out like fingers. My mind raced with every step, every turn, but the voice was a tether I couldn't cut. It guided me, it pulled me. When I reached the corner of 5th and Harper, I saw it immediately. A scrap of paper taped to the base of the flickering streetlight, fluttering in the cold wind. My stomach churned. My hands shook as I picked it up. The writing was precise, neat, almost impossibly so. Read it into your radio, the voice instructed. I obeyed. My own voice sounded alien over the car's radio, echoing into the night. The first step is complete. Proceed to the alley behind the diner on Main. There you will find a package. Open it and inspect its contents. A package, of course. Something that didn't exist until now, waiting for me because it had to. I drove to the diner, the engine whining under the weight of my fear. My hands were slick with sweat, and every shadow along the alley walls seemed to twitch in anticipation, alive with unseen eyes. The package was there, wrapped neatly, tied with string. I hesitated. For one brief, foolish second, I thought about calling for backup. Then I remembered. No one else could see this. No one else could hear the instructions. I was alone, and alone meant obedience. I opened the package. Inside was a small recording device, its button blinking faintly, as if breathing. The voice came from it immediately, layered and metallic. Listen closely. You are about to deliver information that should never exist. You will repeat everything exactly. Do not add, do not skip, do not hesitate. If you do, you will regret it. I pressed play, and the recording hissed. Static first, then words, names, places, details I had no way of knowing, addresses that didn't exist, crimes that hadn't been reported, and instructions, detailed impossible tasks. Go here, take this. Speak this aloud. Obey. The list grew more elaborate, more dangerous. I was to break into abandoned buildings. I was to follow strangers who weren't there. I was to write messages in chalk on sidewalks that no one else would see. Every step felt like a trap, every instruction more impossible than the last. And yet, I did it, because I had to. The night stretched on like a living nightmare. Each task I completed was both relief and terror. Relief that the voice had not punished me yet. Terror because I knew it would. It was never satisfied, always asking for more, always drawing me closer to something that lurked just beyond the reach of understanding. At one point, I found myself in an abandoned subway station. The tunnels were damp, the walls black with mold and decay. The voice instructed me to leave messages on the walls, warnings that no one would ever read. My hands bled from the chalk, but I obeyed. Every word burned into my memory, as if it had already been written in my skull. The more I followed, the more impossible the instructions became. Go to the rooftops, look down on the city, count every shadow, speak their names aloud. My knees buckled, my lungs ached, but I moved. Always moved. The voice was a weight I could not escape. And then came the final instruction of the night, the one I hadn't expected. The voice, calm and certain, said, "Now you will wait, on the bridge overlooking the river, alone, and you will speak the words I give you, or they will come for you." I sat there for what felt like hours, the wind tearing at my coat, the river below dark and silent. My throat was raw. My mind screamed to resist, to laugh, to run. But every instinct in my body told me I was tethered to this command, bound by some unseen force. The words came. I whispered them into the wind, into the night, into the empty city. I don't even remember them now. Names and numbers, places and times, things that should not exist, should not be spoken aloud. And when I finished, when my voice finally went silent, the air seemed to settle. The city exhaled. For a moment, I thought it was over, that I had survived, that I could breathe again. Then the whisper returned, softer now, closer, as if it had been standing behind me all along. You did well. But this is only the beginning. Remember, you cannot refuse. You cannot rest. The instructions never end. They only grow. And so will you. I couldn't move. I couldn't respond. My body felt like it had been hollowed out. Hollowed by the tasks, by the impossible commands, by the weight of listening. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the dark river, feeling the cold seep into my bones. The city was alive in its own quiet, malignant way, full of secrets that only I could hear. Every shadow along the bridges and streets whispered my name. Every silence was a demand. By the time I returned to the station, the sun was brushing the horizon with the faintest light, but it offered no comfort. The tasks were finished for now, but the instructions, they were never finished. The voice waited. Always. Tethered to me through wires, frequencies, through the silence that was never empty. I tried to tell myself it had been a hallucination. The exhaustion of the night shift, the stress, the fear. But I know better. I can still hear it when the lights flicker, when the wind presses against the walls, when the silence stretches too long. The instructions are never truly over, and I am never truly free, because it will call again, because it always does, because obedience is no longer a choice, it is everything. Thought I had understood what fear was. I thought the night shift, the empty streets, the quiet that pressed against your chest like water had taught me every way the world could unsettle you. I was wrong. It started slowly, subtle at first, a shadow where none should be, a corner of the station that seemed just slightly off. I didn't notice it at first, not really. I was too tired, too exhausted from following the instructions, from repeating the words that weren't meant to exist. The walls began to shift. I know how that sounds. Impossible. Crazy. I would have thought so myself if I hadn't lived it. But the walls, they moved. A line of lockers that had been there all week leaned slightly forward. The bulletin board with missing person flyers stretched taller, like it was breathing. I rubbed my eyes, convinced it was exhaustion, convinced it was the tasks, the instructions, the voice, playing tricks on me. But when I blinked, it was still there. I tried to move through the station, to leave, to run outside into the normal night. But the hallways, they weren't the same. Doors that had been open yesterday were closed now. The exit at the front, the one I always used, wasn't there. Just a solid wall of peeling paint and shadows. I ran my fingers along it. The texture was wrong. Not solid plaster, not metal. It felt alive, or maybe decayed, or both at once. It shifted under my touch, like the building itself was breathing around me, watching me, corralling me, forcing me to follow. The phone rang. I flinched. I wanted to ignore it, to throw it, to break it, to make this nightmare end. But I knew better. I had learned that obedience was survival. "Officer," the voice said, calm, unwavering, as though it had been in the room with me all along. "Do not fight it. You must move forward. The walls guide you. The walls wait for you." I swallowed hard, and the station seemed to exhale in reply. The lights flickered. The shadows stretched. Every step I took echoed too loudly, as though the building itself was listening. I tried to find the stairwell to the basement. I had been told there was a package there, a task, an instruction that I had to follow. But the hallway split in ways it hadn't before. I turned left, then right, then left again. The walls behind me pressed closer with every step. The ceiling lowered. My stomach churned. I couldn't tell if I was moving in circles or if the station had grown larger, impossibly so, swallowing space, time, logic itself. "Do you feel it?" the voice asked. "The walls. They are hungry. They are patient. And they will not let you escape until the message is delivered." I tried to speak, tried to argue, but my voice caught in my throat. The words were trapped inside me like my own mouth had betrayed me. The station hummed faintly, an undercurrent of sound that shouldn't exist, vibrating through the floors, through my bones. I finally found the basement door. It was familiar, yet different. The knob was colder than it should have been. My reflection in the tiny glass panel was wrong. Eyes darker, shadows under my skin, as if the walls had started to pull pieces of me into themselves. I pushed the door open and descended the stairs. The basement smelled of damp concrete and rust, a smell I should have known, but tonight it carried a whisper, a presence. The voice instructed me to search the far corner where a crate waited. I found it, small, unassuming, but it throbbed with something inside. Inside the crate was another device, another recording. I hesitated, trembling. Every fiber of me screamed to stop, to refuse, to drop it and run, but I knew better. I had been chosen, and chosen meant obey. The recording played, a low static that slowly resolved into words, commands, details. This time it wasn't just tasks. It was surveillance, names, faces, locations, movements, impossible details that only someone, or something, that existed beyond normal perception could know. And the instructions weren't just impossible, they were terrifying. I was to follow people through the city, through places that didn't exist, speak words that no one else could hear, and return before the walls shifted again. I heard a creak above me. The ceiling seemed closer. The walls seemed thicker. I had the sense they were leaning in, patient, watching, ensuring compliance. I ran my hands along the walls. They weren't solid. They pulsed, almost imperceptibly, as if alive, as if aware. My mind screamed. The station wasn't a station anymore. It was a trap, and I was its prey. The instructions continued, layer upon layer, each step drawing me deeper. I followed them mechanically because refusal wasn't an option. I moved through corridors that had never existed before, past offices that flickered between old memories and impossibilities, and through exits that disappeared as I approached them. Every door I tried to open dissolved into a wall or twisted into a shape I couldn't comprehend. At one point, I paused in what seemed like a hallway, staring down a stretch of lockers that had grown impossibly tall, the ceiling nowhere in sight. The voice whispered through the phone, guiding, commanding, relentless. "Keep moving. Do not stop. The walls will consume hesitation." I moved, step by step, slowly, painfully. My legs ached. My lungs burned, but I couldn't stop. And as I moved, I felt the station tighten around me, the walls pressing closer with every step, narrowing the hallways, bending corners, warping the familiar into something monstrous. I stopped at a door that had not been there before. A pulse of dread ran through me. The voice said nothing at first, only waited. Then it whispered, "Open it. Inside is what you seek, what you must deliver." I opened the door. The room inside was empty, yet it felt full. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching toward me. I could hear my own heartbeat, thumping loudly in the oppressive quiet. And then I understood. The walls were not just around me. They were inside me. Every memory, every fear, every pulse of anxiety had been amplified, reflected back, and magnified. I left the room, the instructions continuing, each step impossible, each corner more twisted than the last. I realized I could no longer trust anything, the walls, the doors, the floor, the ceiling. The station itself had become a labyrinth with a mind, with intent, and I was its instrument. By the time I reached what I thought was the front exit, I stopped. It wasn't there, just a wall of gray peeling paint. The voice whispered, almost tenderly now, "Do not despair. You are exactly where you are meant to be. Obey and you will see. Disobey and you will vanish." I leaned against the wall, sliding down to the floor, trying to calm the panic rising like bile in my throat. The station hummed around me. The walls pulsed. Shadows crept along every surface, reaching, leaning, pressing. And the instructions, the impossible, terrifying, unrelenting instructions, continued in my head, in the device, in the air. Hours passed, though I don't know how many. The world outside the station ceased to exist. There was only this place, only the shifting walls, only the weight of the voice and its commands, and I knew, with a clarity that chilled me to my core, that I could never leave. Not really, not unless the instructions were complete, not unless I had delivered every word, every message, every impossible task that had been whispered into my mind. I pressed my hands to the walls, feeling the vibrations, feeling the intent behind the movement. The station was alive, and it was patient, and I, small, terrified, obedient, was its servant. The phone rang again. I answered. The voice said, "You are doing well, but there is more, always more. And the walls, they are proud." I knew as I held the receiver that I would never be free, that the walls would always wait, shift, close in, that the instructions would never end, that I would always obey, because the station and the voice and the impossible world it had created would not let me go. I sat on the cold floor, listening to the hum of the walls, the pulse of the building, the relentless whisper of orders. I felt the weight of the station pressing down, inescapable, and I understood. Obedience was no longer survival. It was the only reality, and the walls were patient. They always wait, they always watch, and they always remember. I woke up in the station, but I didn't remember sleeping. The chair was cold under me, the fluorescent lights buzzing in that familiar hollow way, and the walls. The walls were the same, or at least they looked the same, but I knew better. I always know better now. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight, and my chest tightened. The weight I felt in my bones wasn't just fear. It was anticipation, a knowing, because I knew what was coming. The phone rang. I picked it up automatically, without thought. The voice was there, calm, expectant. "Officer, you are awake? Good. Your shift begins." I didn't speak. I couldn't. My throat was dry, my jaw tight. I had been through this endless pattern, this cycle of impossible instructions, shifting walls, packages, shadows, and whispers. And yet, here it was again. Midnight. The call. The shift. "You know what to do," the voice said. "The tasks are waiting. You are waiting. Everything is waiting. Begin." I wanted to hang up. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone, to run out into the streets and pretend none of this existed. But I didn't. Because I knew. The station would shift if I tried. The walls would press. The shadows would lean. And worse. Worse than all of it, the voice would notice. So I obeyed. The instructions were familiar and knew at once. Drive the cruiser. Find the street light. Retrieve the note. Read it aloud. Follow the next path. Deliver the message. Open the package. Repeat the words. Obey. Move. Speak. Listen. I moved through the station and the city like a ghost, my own reflection blurred in shop windows, a stranger to myself. The tasks were impossible and terrifying. Each one stretched me thinner, hollowed me out. I didn't know who I was anymore, only that I had to follow. Only that the shift would not end until the last instruction was completed. And yet, the last instruction never came. There was always one more. Always one that stretched the night further, twisted the walls closer, distorted the familiar into something I couldn't trust. I began to notice patterns. The walls would shift subtly every time I completed a task. Doors I had used yesterday were now walls. Hallways extended where they hadn't existed. Shadows lengthened as if to anticipate my movements. I started to speak aloud to myself, a desperate measure. "This isn't real," I said. My voice echoed against the walls, a small rebellion. "This can't be real," the voice answered softly through the phone that had never left my hand. "Reality is irrelevant. Obedience is everything. You are awake but not alive. You are moving but not free. And you are mine. Begin again." I realized then what had happened. What was happening. What would always happen. I had been trapped. Not in the station. Not in the city. But in the shift itself. In the loop. The night never ended. Midnight always came. The phone always rang. The instructions were endless. The walls were alive, and I was tethered to it, like a marionette with invisible strings pulled by a voice that could see and hear everything. I remembered each night, the impossible tasks, the shifting walls, the whispers. Each repetition blurred into the next. Each shadow, each street, each package had been delivered 100 times, 1,000. I could not count. I had lost the meaning of time. And yet, I could still feel it. The pulse of the station, the hum of the walls, the breath of the shadows, waiting, watching, guiding me. The city outside no longer existed. I moved through streets I had memorized, streets that changed shape in my mind, in the instructions, in the voice. People walked past me, or maybe they didn't. Faces blurred. Names I whispered aloud to the wind returned in echoes that were mine but not mine. I tried to resist once. Just a flicker of rebellion. I left the cruiser, tried to run toward the horizon I remembered from when the shifts had been normal. But the station had already expanded beyond its walls. The city itself seemed to lean in, bend, fold. I found myself back inside, the phone ringing, the voice waiting. "You cannot leave," it said, patient, almost tender. "This is your shift, your life, your purpose. Do not fight. Do not hesitate. Begin again." And so I did. The instructions were harsher now, stranger. Leave messages on walls no one could see. Follow people who weren't there. Speak the words that belong to others. Deliver packages into shadows. And each time the walls of the station, the streets, the alleys closed tighter. The air pressed down. My legs ached. My lungs burned. My mind frayed. I began to notice I was not alone. Not in the conventional sense. Shadows shifted with intent. A shape lingered just beyond my vision. Movement out of sync with reality. Faces that reflected my own fear, my own exhaustion, my own hollowed-out obedience. Always following, always waiting, always watching. The phone rang again. I answered. The voice said, "You have done well, officer. But the shift is not over. The night will not end. Do you understand?" I swallowed hard. "Yes," I said. My voice sounded strange, foreign, like it belonged to someone I used to be. The voice continued, unwavering, insistent. "You are awake, but only within the shift. You are alive, but only as long as you obey. Begin again." I walked the halls, following instructions I no longer questioned. The walls stretched impossibly, shifted, bent corners into hallways that had never existed. The ceiling dipped and rose as if breathing. I felt the station wrap around me, patient, sentient, endless. I delivered the messages. I repeated the words. I followed the paths. And each time the walls shifted, shadows lengthened, the impossible instructions continued. I stopped noticing how long it took. Minutes, hours, days? Time didn't matter. Only the shift. Only obedience. Only the voice, the walls whispered. I could hear them. Low hums of expectation, murmurs of approval, warnings. Each crack, each peeling edge, each shadowed corner was alive with intent. I touched them, felt them pulse, felt them tug at me. I tried to remember life before this, before the calls, before the instructions, before the shifting walls. I remembered the stars outside, the warmth of sunlight, laughter, the sound of another human voice. But they felt like memories that belonged to someone else, someone I used to be. The voice called again. "Your shift continues. The instructions never end. You are awake, but you are mine. Obey." And I did. I don't know how many times I have answered that call, how many impossible instructions I have followed, how many nights I have spent moving through the walls, the shadows, the twisted streets, delivering messages that should not exist. And yet the shift never ends. I feel it in my bones. The station waits. The city waits. The voice waits. Every tick of the clock is a tether. Every flicker of light is a reminder. I am awake, but I am not free. I am moving, but I am not alive. I am obeying endlessly. Sometimes I hear echoes of myself in the walls. The officer I used to be, trapped, delivering instructions, speaking words that never existed. And I know that when I close my eyes, I am still moving, still following, still guided by the voice that can never rest, that will never rest, that will never allow me to rest. The shift is eternal. The midnight call is eternal. The instructions are eternal. I will always answer the phone. I will always obey. I will always move through walls that shift, through shadows that watch, through streets that twist. I am the night shift. I am the voice's servant. I am trapped forever. The walls breathe around me. The shadows stretch toward me. The instructions never end, and I am awake.